The muffled report of automatic weapons fire was swallowed momentarily by the raging Norfolk blizzard, only to return as an unnatural echo, a percussive metallic thunder shattering the deep, bone-aching winter silence. 5 bodies, saturated with fresh blood and convulsing from shock, were hurled through the automatic doors of the VA emergency room in a horrifying, synchronous collision. They didn't just walk in, they crashed. Crimson trails smeared instantly across the immaculate white epoxy floors, staining the hospital's carefully maintained veneer of order. Code red. The patient, a man appearing middle-aged but hardened by unseen stress, was perforated by 5 distinct bullet tracks. Arterial blood erupted from his chest cavity like a series of broken garden fountains, splashing the gurney rails. Immediate assessment: torn subclavian artery, almost certainly. High risk of aortic involvement. Calculation registered instantly. 3 minutes, perhaps less, before irreversible cardiac arrest. The promised doctor was still absent. Beside her, Nurse Bradley, fresh out of basic training, was a study in paralyzing terror. Her hands, slick with blood, trembled violently as she attempted to apply direct pressure to wounds far beyond the scope of her basic licensure. "He's crashing, Giselle. He's dying. What are we supposed to do? What do we do?" Bradley whimpered, her voice cracking. For precisely 2 seconds, a geological eternity in trauma time, Giselle Harper became completely eerily still. Her face, framed by the few loose auburn curls that had escaped her hastily constructed high bun, was a mask of perfect, chilling professional detachment. The constellations of natural freckles scattered across her otherwise porcelain cheeks seemed to vanish as her focus compressed her features into a single point of icy determination. Then the stillness broke. Her hands moved, not with the tentative, familiar motions of a bedside licensed practical nurse, the one who handled meal trays and replaced depleted forebags. They moved with the relentless, flawless economy of a high-precision machine, calibrated and programmed for a solitary, impossible mission: life preservation under extreme duress. "Prep the thoracotomy tray. Now. You absolute. You do not possess the authority." Webb's face bloated, instantly turning a mottled, furious purple. "Do you intend to let this man bleed out on my floor?" Giselle offered him no glance, no acknowledgement. Her focus was absolute. Her specialized hands were already closing around the scalpel handle, moving with a surgical accuracy and speed utterly impossible for someone of her documented training level. "Vascular clamps, now. 10 seconds or I will resort to manual compression." What the stunned audience, including the enraged Dr. Webb, failed to grasp, what they could not possibly comprehend, was that the woman now unilaterally seizing control of the trauma bay had logged years operating in conditions exponentially worse than this climate-controlled, however chaotic, emergency department. She had worked field trauma in places where the very earth shuddered from artillery strikes, where the only illumination came from the roaring inferno of burning transport vehicles, and where the entirety of her life-saving inventory was contained within a single backpack rig. In the next 20 minutes, the foundational assumptions of every person in that hospital, their entire constructed reality regarding the seemingly low-ranking LPN before them, would be irrevocably shattered. Having stabilized the initial bleeding, Giselle moved to the wash sink, her hands passing through the cleansing ritual with unnerving, mechanical precision. Her method involved 7 distinct, rigorous steps entirely foreign to standard civilian medical protocol. First, 3 meticulous circular motions on the palms. Then, dedicated attention between each digit, followed by pulling and twisting motions up the back of the hands, culminating at the wrists, a scrubbing pattern resembling rigorous preoperative sterile prep, not simple emergency decontamination. Her light brown hair, secured in the high, functional bun, swayed marginally, yet her core remained flawlessly balanced, centered, a coiled spring of readiness. Dr. Webb, seizing the opportunity to perform, strode theatrically across the tiled floor, his starched white coat ballooning dramatically behind him like an ill-fitting theatrical cape. "The auxiliary nurse, everyone, thinks she has the clearance to handle surgical-grade instruments now," he announced, his voice projecting artificially loud for maximum impact. A crowd of 15 onlookers had coalesced. 3 staff nurses, 2 security officers, for nervous waiting patients, 3 anxious family members, 2 janitors, and 1 off-duty EMT who'd stopped in for his friend's laceration repair. This is gross negligence. This is a catastrophic liability lawsuit waiting for a plaintiff. Someone contact legal services immediately. The Norfolk, Virginia Emergency Department was a cavernous space. 40 beds arranged in a wide horseshoe configuration encircling the central nursing hub. The raging blizzard outside had mercifully tripped half the aging overhead light banks, casting deep, ominous pools of shadow between the remaining harsh islands of flickering fluorescent tubes. The spectators, scattered throughout the gloom, enjoyed an unobstructed view of the unfolding drama. Several had already raised their cell phones, initiating impromptu recordings of the escalating, highly visible confrontation between the chief of emergency medicine and the lowest-ranked nurse on staff. Impervious to the surrounding chaos, Giselle retrieved a small, deeply weathered write-in-the-rain notebook from the pocket of her scrubs. Her fingers located a tactical pen with the same instinctual, automatic motion used for grasping a tool. She wrote swiftly, efficiently, her penmanship small and ruthlessly precise. Case 247. GSF denied treatment. December 10, 2025. The tiny, neat script filled the margins of pages already densely covered with similar, relentless documentation. 2 years, she had been keeping this ledger. 2 years of meticulously recording every Gold Star family turned away due to bureaucratic red tape. Every widow told their essential benefits were indefinitely pending. Every child of a fallen serviceman denied immediate care due to spurious administrative errors. Nurse Bradley, recognized throughout the department as Webb's unquestioning favorite, the one who perpetually secured the desirable daytime rotations and the least demanding patients, pushed forward eagerly. She's doing it again, Dr. Webb. Operating significantly outside the legal parameters of her practice. Should I notify security immediately to restrain her? Bradley's voice was heavy with a saccharine satisfaction, the unmistakable pleasure derived from witnessing the downfall of a perceived rival, the smug triumph of the rule follower over the renegade. She was the teacher's pet, the one who always, rigidly, colored inside the prescribed lines. The patient remained clad in soaking civilian clothing, a cheap flannel shirt and faded jeans. But Giselle's finely honed, operative eye instantly registered the subtle indicators others missed. The unusual bulk beneath the fabric was neither adipose tissue nor muscle mass. It was the outline of a low-profile, military-grade tactical vest, precisely the type favored by Tier 1 special operations units for concealed wear in permissive environments. She noted the meticulously executed, straight-bar European lacing pattern on his tactical boots, a rigid contrast to the standard crisscross method. Most telling was the heavy-duty Sunto Corps watch on his left wrist, standard issue for naval special warfare personnel, and the ghostly pale tan line circling his ring finger, a clear indication of a recently removed wedding band, standard operational security, OPSEC, procedure. This was not merely a random shooting victim. This man was an asset, a professional. Her movements never faltered as she began organizing the surgical instruments on the prep tray. But she did not use the prescribed, sterile, school-taught arrangement. She was configuring them in pure combat triage sequence. Immediate, lightning-fast access prioritized over meticulous protocol. Clamps arranged precisely on the left, the scalpel centered for maximum draw speed, sutures stacked neatly on the right, and the gauze placed in a tactical reload position. It was a reflex-based choreography, burned into her hands through years of brutal repetition in forgotten zones, places where a single wasted second meant the definitive difference between a soldier repatriated under a flag-draped casket and a functional asset going home alive. Security Chief Rodriguez, a retired Marine Master Sergeant who had traded active service for the reliable government benefits of the VA, forcibly parted the onlookers. His hand was already on his radio, the immediate call for armed reinforcement pending. This is a profound breach of security and protocol. It is entirely unacceptable. I am contacting Norfolk PD. We have an auxiliary nurse attempting unauthorized, invasive medical procedures. His voice resonated with the unyielding, flat authority of a man accustomed to 2 decades of unquestioning obedience. But in the dim periphery, nearly swallowed by the shadows, Pete the janitor observed the scene with entirely different eyes. Pete had been a Navy corpsman, an FMF-rated medic who carried memories of Fallujah that routinely dragged him from sleep at 0300 hours. He had been mopping the same 3-foot radius of floor for 5 minutes. His entire focus riveted on Giselle's efficient hands. The way she shifted her weight, the low, centered posture of her body, the specific, braced angle of her elbows during instrumentation. He whispered a single observation, so low that only the nearby off-duty EMT caught the words. "That is not civilian training. That is dedicated ghost unit technique. I saw it once 20 years ago. The operative performing it had clearance higher than the Almighty himself." Giselle's fingers had betrayed a subtle, high-frequency tremor when she first made skin contact, the inevitable result of massive adrenaline surging through her system. But the instant her specialized hands grasped the weight and balance of the scalpel, that tremor vanished entirely. Her touch became granite steady, the micro-movements precise as the escapement of a Swiss timepiece. The transformation was so abrupt, so total, that Nurse Bradley physically recoiled, taking an involuntary step backward. It was the biological equivalent of an operative flipping a concealed switch, instantaneously transitioning from flawed human being to flawless, mission-driven machine. The patient's flannel shirt had been partially shredded during the rapid transport. Through a jagged tear in the fabric over his left deltoid, a large military font tattoo in stark black ink was visible. Devgru. The accompanying text confirmed the affiliation. The only easy day was yesterday. This was the insignia of Navy SEAL Team 6, the world's most clandestine and elite maritime special operations force. But the marking was largely obscured by pooling blood, requiring intimate knowledge or direct scrutiny to understand its profound significance. The blizzard outside intensified its assault. Wind howled through the ambulance bay doors with the sound of tearing metal whenever they cycled open. Snow, fine as dust, swirled across the emergency room floor in chaotic, miniature cyclones, melting instantly into macabre pink puddles where it encountered the blood. The aging backup generators groaned, their internal mechanisms protesting the strain of keeping vital systems online. The fluorescent lights strobed and flickered violently, casting erratic, distorting shadows that made every bystander appear suspicious, dangerous, like potential enemies moving in the dark. Dr. Webb capitalized on the moment, retrieving his cell phone and activating the video recorder. "This is Dr. Marcus Webb, Chief of Emergency Medicine for the Norfolk, Virginia. I am formally documenting that licensed practical nurse Giselle Harper is initiating unauthorized, invasive surgical procedures in Trauma Bay 1, in direct defiance of multiple orders to cease and desist. I assert that this represents grounds for immediate termination and mandatory revocation of her medical licensure." His voice was theatrical, engineered for maximum volume and performance, ensuring that his authority would be documented and indisputable. But Giselle was already beyond listening. The initial incision was complete. The scalpel tracked through skin, fascia, and muscle with an almost shocking efficiency, the speed born of years of high-stakes practice. Her expertise was not forged in meticulously clean, brightly lit operating suites with perfect sterile fields, but on makeshift tables, the hood of a battered Humvee perhaps, where the only available anesthetic might be a piece of spent ordnance to clench, and the operating lights were the unsteady flares of burning structures. The emergent thoracotomy was technically flawless textbook, if that textbook had been meticulously authored for the unforgiving dynamics of a combat zone, not a metropolitan hospital. Mid-procedure, she spoke sharply to the Afghan interpreter lying in bed 12, instructing him in fluent, perfectly accented Pashto to apply counterpressure to another patient's superficial wound. The language flowed from her effortlessly, indicative of deep, years-long immersion. The interpreter's eyes snapped wide in instant recognition. He replied first in Pashto, then switched urgently to stunned English. "You were there. You were in Helmand province. I recognize the dialect. I can hear it in your voice." The computer terminal at the central nursing station emitted a sharp, attention-grabbing beep. Nurse Bradley, attempting to dig up incriminating evidence, had tried to access Giselle's official personnel file. Instead of the expected standard record, a stark, Arterial red banner violently seized the screen. Access restricted. Security clearance required. File sealed by Department of Defense directive. Bradley's complexion drained instantly. She tried again, leveraging her supervisor-level authorization code. The same message appeared, coupled with a terrifying addition. Unauthorized access attempt logged. Security notification sent. Meanwhile, the patient with 5 penetrating wounds was definitively stabilizing. Giselle had executed procedures in 12 minutes that would have required 20 minutes from even a seasoned civilian trauma surgeon. The unique, nearly invisible phantom stitch she employed to repair the subclavian artery was absent from every curriculum in civilian medical academia. It involved specific 4 mm sutures placed at precisely 8-second intervals. A speed-intensive technique pioneered and drilled in classified facilities for high-value operators who required rapid stabilization and immediate redeployment. The advanced quick-clot hemostatic agent she utilized to pack a secondary wound was conspicuously absent from the hospital's official inventory. It was sourced from her own personal supply, a small, flat tactical pouch she habitually carried in her scrub pants. Her application of the tourniquet, positioned high and tight, the exact time meticulously marked on the fabric with a black Sharpie, adhered precisely to Tactical Combat Casualty Care, TCCC, protocols. These were specific life-or-death procedures drilled relentlessly into the best special operations medics, techniques responsible for saving thousands of lives across the theaters of Iraq and Afghanistan. They were methods that absolutely no licensed practical nurse should possess the knowledge or muscle memory to execute. Nurse Thompson, an experienced veteran of the floor who prioritized clinical care over the toxic departmental politics, edged closer, her expression a mixture of awe and genuine apprehension. Her voice was barely audible. How did you recognize the aberrant subclavian artery variation? That is a textbook 1 in 10,000 anatomical anomaly. Even skilled surgeons missed that detail. Webb immediately pounced on this, convinced he had finally secured his victory. Aha! You see, she must have accessed his classified medical history without authorization. That is a grievous HIPAA violation. She's probably just some ambitious, overreaching Army Nurse Corps officer, nothing special, just someone who views herself as superior to standard operating procedure. His tone was jubilant, the sound of a prosecutor who had finally located the smoking gun. But the patient's eyes slowly fluttered open. Admiral Thomas Hayes, Deputy Commander of Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, was staring directly at the intricate stitches securing his chest incision. His fingers, trained to recognize minute detail under duress, weakly traced the unique, precise pattern, recognizing the signature spacing and the unusual angle of entry. His voice was frail from blood loss, yet utterly distinct. Ghost protocol. That is your ghost protocol, isn't it? The standardized, superficial dog tags Giselle wore, the ones labeling her as a routine medical corps enlisted LPN, had shifted slightly during the violent procedure. Beneath them, partially obscured by the collar of her scrubs, lay a secondary set. These were older, heavily worn, the metal smoothed to a dull sheen by years of continuous wear. The inscription did not read Medical Corps. It bore a designation that officially did not exist, a unit that operated outside the bureaucratic lines, in the necessary morally gray chasm between legality and absolute operational requirement. Chief of Staff Harrison, a woman yanked from sleep at 0200 hours and still dressed in a hastily thrown-on suit, burst through the reinforced ER doors. Review the security footage from the last hour. Now. Her command brooked no delay and demanded instant obedience. She was a retired Air Force full colonel who had transitioned to civilian administration but retained every ounce of her commanding military presence. As Giselle reached for additional sutures, the weathered notebook slipped from her scrub pocket. It struck the tile floor and instantly sprang open, the pages fanning out like a damning hand of cards. Page after page of meticulous documentation. 247 cases catalogued. Gold Star families systematically denied benefits. Widows rejected for missing or manipulated paperwork. Children of deceased warriors turned away because their father's ultimate sacrifice was deemed insufficiently documented. 2 years of damning, indisputable evidence detailing the systemic failure of the very institution designed to safeguard military dependence. Admiral Hayes' gaze fixed on a single name circled repeatedly in the notebook. Michael Harper, Sergeant First Class, killed in action, Helmand Province, Afghanistan, August 12, 2017. His eyes lifted immediately from the page to Giselle's face. The recognition was immediate, visceral, absolute. Michael Harper. God, he saved my entire unit that day. We were completely pinned down under devastating crossfire. He executed a lone charge against 3 machine gun emplacements simply to buy us the necessary seconds to extract our wounded. He knew definitively that he was not coming back. The emergency room descended into a profound, suffocating silence, broken only by the rhythmic hum of life support machines and the banshee howl of the exterior storm. Every single person present was frozen, watching, intuitively sensing that a monumental, irrevocable shift in the environment was occurring, even if they lacked the context to understand its full meaning. VA Director Robert Chin pushed forcefully through the static crowd. He had been summoned by Harrison, ripped abruptly from an official reception at the Watergate, his expensive tuxedo still immaculate save for the crystalline snow melting visibly on the shoulders. He surveyed the chaotic tableau, Webb, still recording, Bradley, plastered against a wall in shock, Rodriguez, hand frozen on his radio mic, and Giselle, covered head to toe in arterial spray, yet possessing the absolute stillness of a frozen mountain lake. Chen's eyes fell to the open notebook on the floor. He retrieved it, scanning the meticulous entries. His face cycled rapidly through confusion, dawning recognition, and then outright horror. He lifted his gaze to Giselle. The question emerged as an almost inaudible gasp. You are Michael Harper's widow. You are the operative who has been systematically placing these detailed corruption reports under my private office door. And you are the medic who saved my life in that forward emergency facility in Kandahar before my promotion. The realization, a quantum singularity of truth, hung heavy in the air, instantly vaporizing every previous assumption held by the observers. This was the moment that exposed not only Giselle's genuine operational identity, but also the dark systemic conspiracy targeting Gold Star families. The purposeful denials, the manipulated paperwork, the administrative errors that were always, infallibly, targeted against the families of those who had paid the ultimate price. Chen's hands were visibly shaking as he manipulated his private phone, pulling up a classified file that, by all protocols, should have been inaccessible from an unsecured civilian device. But certain names, certain operations, possessed a transcendent security clearance all their own. He read the summary aloud, his voice fracturing with emotional weight. Operation Silent Guardian, August 12, 2017. Sergeant First Class Michael Harper, Kia. While successfully enabling the extraction of 7 personnel from SEAL Team 6, including then-Commander Thomas Hayes. He took a ragged breath. Widow. Ghost Protocol. Medic Giselle Harper. Call sign, Ghost 7. Webb attempted to re-establish his authority. His bluster a thin veneer over raw, mounting terror. This is utterly ridiculous. Ghost units are a myth perpetrated on the internet. Covert special operations medics, female operatives who legally do not exist, deployed into civilian populations. This is nothing but ridiculous, tin-foil hat conspiracy nonsense. He scanned the crowd desperately for validation, finding only stunned, accusatory stares. Rodriguez, the security chief, had turned ash-white. His hand dropped slowly, deliberately, away from his radio mic. He had walked the streets of Fallujah. He had witnessed operational anomalies that defied explanation. His voice, when it came, was a barely audible rasp. I saw a ghost unit once. Marine Recon was pinned down trying to extract a diplomat's family from a hostile hot zone. We lost 3 men in the opening 90 seconds. Then this woman materialized. She looked exactly like a local medical volunteer. She navigated us through the city using routes that appeared nonsensical until we realized she had been meticulously mapping them for months. She got every survivor out. When I demanded her name, she simply said, "Ghosts do not carry names." Impervious to the surrounding collapse of command, Giselle glanced briefly at her personal cell phone. A notification flashed brightly from the Navy Federal Credit Union. The long-stalled life insurance policy, her own, pending for 8 agonizing years since her husband's death, had just been officially approved and funded. The timing was not coincidence. It was perfect, lethal synchronization. Someone powerful was watching, and they had been carefully staging this moment of operational exposure. Webb, recognizing the ground dissolving beneath him, made one final, desperate bid for control. Even if this delusional narrative is accurate, she fundamentally violated every single hospital protocol. She operated outside her legal scope of practice. She could have killed him. The Joint Commission will remove my head if I fail to report this massive breach immediately. Admiral Hayes, stabilized and focused, began to sit up slowly, his movements deliberate and intensely determined. The bullets had missed the most immediately vital structures only thanks to Giselle's brutal, swift intervention. His voice, though weakened, now carried the heavy, inescapable authority forged by 3 decades in Naval Special Warfare Command. Dr. Webb, Hayes stated flatly, cutting through the man's panic. This woman has preserved more lives in active combat theaters than you have encountered in the entirety of your sheltered career. She was trained by the most elite combat surgeons on the planet, operating under environmental duress that would cause you to immediately void your bladder. She just successfully repaired my subclavian using classified techniques your entire staff has never heard of. Hayes locked eyes with the chief of medicine. Therefore, I strongly suggest you immediately close your mouth before I place a single secure call that will have you justifying to a Congressional Oversight Committee why you attempted to actively prevent a decorated combat veteran from executing a life-saving procedure. The ensuing silence was total. Even the shrieking blizzard seemed to hold its breath, pausing as if nature itself waited for the next command. Giselle remained perfectly stationary, her startling green eyes performing a silent, comprehensive scan, cataloging every person's reaction, identifying emergent threats, and calculating contingency plans. It was the ingrained, constant tactical assessment, a reflexive habit that would never relinquish its hold, the vigilance that had preserved her life in operational environments where identification as American, as military, or as anything other than a local medical affiliate meant guaranteed death or capture. Pete the janitor finally broke the spell. He stepped forward, extracting something carefully from his stained uniform pocket. It was an object old, heavily worn, and meticulously wrapped in thin plastic film against years of floor wax and caustic cleaning agents. A specialized Navy SEAL Challenge coin, Task Force Blue designation. He extended it to Giselle. My son, Kandahar, 2010. His convoy hit an IED. Their corpsman died immediately. My boy was bleeding out fast. A woman appeared out of the dust, looked like a local medical student. She stabilized him and for others. She gave me this coin, said keep it safe, said I'd know when the time came to return it. Pete's eyes were glistening with unshed tears. That was you, wasn't it? Giselle's hand instinctively moved to her own scrub pocket, where an identical, polished coin rested. She did not physically accept Pete's offering, but she gave one swift, almost imperceptible nod. The gesture was minuscule, yet Pete saw it. No, sir, this is significantly larger than initial estimates. Yes, sir, I understand. They are already inbound. Roger that. Through the emergency room's frosted, rattling windows, high-intensity red lights materialized in the distance, tearing visible streaks through the blinding blizzard. These were not the low-slung lights of ambulances. They were positioned too high, traveling too swiftly for any ground vehicle. The corresponding sound arrived seconds later. The deep, distinctive, unmistakable thrum-thrum-thrum of heavy helicopter rotors. Not standard military airframes, but the unique acoustic signature instantly identifiable to anyone with special operations experience. MH-60 Blackhawks, utilized exclusively by the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the elite night-flying Night Stalkers. Bradley finally found her voice, a thin, terrified squeak barely audible above the rising rotor noise. What is happening? Who is coming? Harrison answered, her former colonel bearing now fully reinstated, sharp and cold. Blacksite extraction teams do not deploy for folklore, Nurse Bradley. They deploy for high-value assets deemed critical to national security. The reinforced windows of the emergency room began to vibrate violently as the heavy aircraft neared. Snow outside spun into violent, localized vortexes. The tremendous rotor wash created a localized, terrifying ground hurricane. Parking lot light poles bent and swayed under the pressure, several snapping entirely. Car alarms detonated sequentially across the lot as the pressure waves struck their chassis. Webb's phone remained clutched in his hand, still recording, though his tremor was now so severe the resulting video feed would be hopelessly distorted. This is impossible. It cannot be happening. Licensed practical nurses do not receive exfiltration via black helicopters. This is a VA hospital, not a Tom Clancy novel. Admiral Hayes stood, his movement careful, deliberate, and yet radiating fierce determination. He should have been dead. Despite the 5 high-caliber bullets Giselle had just skillfully extracted from his vital organs, despite the catastrophic blood loss that should have rendered him permanently unconscious, he stood rigidly at attention, his eyes fixed on Dr. Webb. Dr. Webb, what you are witnessing is the activation of a high-priority sleeper asset. Ghost protocol medics aren't just EMTs. They are the most highly trained, utterly deniable combat medical specialists on the planet. They are surgically embedded in civilian life, running ghost lives, waiting for the one call that justifies years of absolute silence. They train for years to craft identities that are flawless and undetectable. This woman, Ghost 7, chose the role of an LPN. She chose to endure your daily, petty humiliations, to watch the very families her husband died protecting suffer needlessly, all to maintain her deep cover. That level of silent, grinding endurance requires a caliber of courage you wouldn't recognize if it slapped you across the face. The leather-bound notebook, a banal tool of bureaucracy, remained on the linoleum, its thin pages fluttering slightly in the cold, chaotic gusts preceding the hellos. Chun knelt, his hands trembling slightly, and picked it up. He skimmed the meticulous, almost clinical handwriting, his eyes widening with every line. January 15th. Widow Martinez's son arrived critical, denied emergency triage. Reason cited, lost paperwork. February 3rd. Gold Star wife Thompson explicitly informed her husband's death benefits were under indefinite review indefinitely. March 22nd. Sergeant Davis's traumatized children turned away, citing incomplete father service records. The horror was not in the isolated entries, but in the relentless accumulation. 2 years of surgical, painstaking documentation. Chen's voice, usually steady, was now thick with disbelief and rising fury. Every single one of these cases, they all trace back to the same administrative choke point, the same small group of people handling the crucial files. This is far beyond incompetence, he spat. This is calculated malice. Someone has systematically and intentionally targeted Gold Star families, exploiting their grief and paperwork vulnerability. The Black Hawks were directly over the structure now, the rotor wash an acoustic weapon, rattling bone and glass even through the reinforced concrete roof. Yet they didn't touch down on the helipad. Instead, they held a low hover over the staff parking lot, unleashing streams of black-clad operators onto the asphalt using fast ropes. Through the dusty emergency room windows, figures in anonymous, matte black tactical gear established an iron perimeter. Their weapons were set, their movements fluid, coordinated with the kind of military precision that costs billions and saves lives. Rodriguez stammered, finally finding his voice. Those aren't just regular security. That's Tier 1. That's Key AG, Delta Force. What in God's name is happening here? A new sound cut through the noise, broadcast with chilling, unhurried authority over the hospital's aged PA system. It was a voice of pure, cultivated neutrality. Accentless, professionally modulated, the product of decades spent in secure communication bunkers. VA Medical Center Norfolk, this is Blacksite Command. We are initiating a priority alpha extraction, authorized under National Security Directive 572. All hospital personnel are ordered to halt all movement and remain secured in place. Any attempt to interfere with our operators will be prosecuted immediately as an act of domestic terrorism. Compliance is mandatory. The main emergency room doors burst open, collapsing slightly on their tracks. 6 operators entered in flawless tactical formation, moving like one organism. Their weapons were lowered but ready to snap up in a nanosecond. They wore no unit patches, no rank insignia, nothing but the generic U.S. government designation visible on their heavy tactical vests. They moved through the emergency room like mercury flowing around obstacles, never stopping, always advancing toward Giselle. The team leader, identifiable only by a tiny infrared patch visible solely to specialized night optics, approached her. His voice was electronically modulated through his tactical mask. Ghost 7, I am Reaper 6. We are here for you. National Command Authority has authorized your immediate reactivation. We have a developing global situation that requires your specific critical skill set. Giselle hadn't moved through the entire terrifying ingress. She stood exactly where she had finished the surgery, her hands still slick with Admiral Hayes's blood, her scrubs evidence of recent, successful life-saving work. When she finally spoke, the change in her voice was stark. The hesitant, deferential, submissive tone of the LPN was utterly gone, replaced by something honed, hard, and undeniably authoritative. The voice of someone who had issued life-or-death orders in combat and expected immediate, unquestioning obedience. My daughter. She is the only reason I stayed dark for so long. If you are activating me, she comes with me or I don't move an inch. Reaper 6 gave a sharp, professional nod. Already secured. She is en route to Little Creek Naval Base now. Full protective detail. The threat against your family has been confirmed and escalated. That is why we are here tonight. The people who killed your husband, Sergeant First Class Michael Harper, they knew who you were. They've known for years. We've been watching them watch you, waiting for them to break cover. They made their move tonight. The shooting wasn't a random attack. They were trying to silence Admiral Hayes because he was dangerously close to uncovering the truth about your husband's death. The revelation hit the room like a seismic shockwave. This was not merely about bureaucratic denial of benefits or administrative incompetence. This was about cold-blooded murder, treasonous conspiracy, and the systematic targeting of the families of fallen Special Operations personnel. Admiral Hayes spoke again, his voice gaining strength as the adrenaline flooded his system. Michael Harper didn't just save my team in Kandahar. He uncovered something during that mission, something dark and systemic that certain powerful people wanted permanently buried. When he was killed, they assumed the secret died with him. They failed to realize he had passed the information to his wife. They never knew that Ghost 7 had been documenting everything meticulously, building an irrefutable case, waiting for the one right moment to drop the hammer. Giselle reached into the pocket of her scrub top and pulled out a small, highly encrypted drive. No bigger than a thumbnail. She had carried it for 8 years, hidden in plain sight among the disposable detritus of a nurse's daily existence. She handed it over to Reaper 6. Everything is on there. Financial records, communication intercepts, names of the people involved. 247 families weren't denied benefits by accident. They were targeted because their loved ones knew something, saw something, or were involved in classified operations that certain people want utterly forgotten. Chen's phone rang, a secure line. He answered, listened, his expression shifting from shock to awe, then handed the phone to Giselle. It's for you, the Secretary of Defense. The room watched in absolute, stunned silence as Giselle took the call. Her side of the conversation was brief, professional, and entirely focused on command and control. Yes, sir. Understood, sir. Condition green. Ready for immediate deployment. She paused. Then her voice hardened, demanding ultimate leverage. One requirement, sir. The families documented in my notebook, they get everything they are owed, plus immediate interest plus statutory penalties. Non-negotiable. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. She handed the phone back to Chun. Done. The Harper rule goes into effect immediately. No Gold Star family will ever be denied emergency benefits or medical treatment while waiting for bureaucratic paperwork. Emergency medical treatment is authorized immediately upon presentation of a military ID or a death certificate. full investigation into the past 10 years of denials with full retroactive compensation for all affected families. Webb finally managed to speak, though the sound was barely a ragged whisper. But you're just a nurse. You clean bedpans. You take orders from everyone. How is this even possible? Giselle turned to face him fully for the first time, giving him her undivided attention. Her deep green eyes were now cold, devoid of warmth, like Arctic ice. Dr. Webb, I have been shot at by Taliban fighters in close quarters. I've had 82mm mortars drop so close they ruptured my eardrums. I've performed emergency thoracic surgery in the back of moving vehicles while taking direct fire. I have pulled more shrapnel and metal out of more dying bodies than you have seen in your entire comfortable, pampered career. I chose to be just a nurse, because it allowed me to help people quietly without anyone asking dangerous questions. But every time you humiliated me, every time you made me feel small, I documented another family you failed. Your contempt was the perfect cover, and it worked flawlessly. As if on cue, a distinct ringtone sounded on Giselle's scrub pocket phone, the general line. Chen answered it, listening intently. It's the law offices of Stewart and Associates. The class action lawsuit on behalf of 500 Gold Star families has just been approved for expedited federal processing. The systemic denial of benefits, documented by the humble LPN, was about to be exposed in federal court. The helicopters outside began spinning up again, rotors accelerating into the howl of takeoff speed. Reaper 6 touched his earpiece, receiving a critical update. Ma'am, we need to move now. Enemy assets are confirmed. 20 minutes out. Extraction is immediate. Giselle looked around the emergency room one last time. At Pete, still standing rigidly, holding his salute despite the ache in his arm. At the Afghan interpreter, who had respectfully placed his hand over his heart in the traditional gesture of profound respect. At the other nurses, some crying quietly, some utterly stunned, all feverishly reconsidering every dismissive interaction they'd had with the quiet LPN who never complained, never fought back, never stood up for herself. She walked purposefully to her locker, opening it with the combination she'd used every day for 2 years. Inside, tucked behind a spare set of pristine scrubs, was a small, tightly packed nylon bag. She had kept it there since her very first shift, knowing that this precise moment, the moment when the ghost would have to become solid again, when the shadow would step into the glaring light, would eventually arrive. The bag contained a single uniform, not the crisp dress blues of a Navy medic, nor the multicam pattern of modern combat. It was something entirely different. Black fabric, completely sterile, with no insignia, no rank slides, and no name tape. The functional uniform of the Ghost Protocol. The specialized medics who operated in the perilous spaces between declared war and undeclared peace, saving lives in places where America could not officially be present. She didn't change into it yet, but she slung the bag over her shoulder, the gesture itself a powerful signal to everyone watching that the meek, submissive woman they thought they knew had never truly existed. The struggling widow, the victim of the system. All of it had been a meticulously crafted identity, a protective legend built to allow her to operate unseen. Harrison stepped forward, her voice formal and shaky. Giselle Harper, on behalf of the Norfolk, Virginia Medical Center, I formally apologize for the inexcusable treatment you have endured. Your service, both acknowledged and unacknowledged, deserves our absolute highest respect. When you return, if you return, there will be a position waiting for you. Not as an LPN. As Chief of Combat Medicine Training. We desperately need someone to teach our doctors what real, high-stakes trauma medicine actually looks like. Giselle nodded curtly, but offered no response. Her attention had fully shifted to the tactical situation. She could perceive what the civilians couldn't. The subtle signs that Reaper SX's team was becoming intensely nervous. The way they kept checking their corners, the micro-adjustments to their firing stances, the fingers moving deliberately from trigger guards onto triggers. They were expecting hostile contact, and soon. We need to go now, Reaper 6 urged, his voice tight with new urgency. Giselle moved toward the ruptured doors, but Webb, desperate to assert the last, crumbling vestige of his authority, stepped directly in front of her. His face was blotchy red, sweating profusely despite the cold air blast. You can't just leave. There are protocols, paperwork to sign, exit interviews. You work for me, and I have not dismissed you. The moment hung in a perfect, precarious balance. Webb's fragile power colliding with absolute military authority. Giselle stood perfectly still, her body language shifting almost imperceptibly, becoming taut and predatory. The black-clad operators, weapons still lowered but instantly ready, locked their focus onto the threat to their principal. Admiral Hayes decisively shattered the tension. Dr. Webb, stand aside. That is not a request. As of 3 minutes ago, Ghost 7 holds the operational equivalent rank of Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Army. You are interfering with a national security directive operation. The next person who attempts to obstruct her will not be asked politely. Webb stumbled back, his face crumbling instantly from anger to profound fear, then to something close to utter shame. The towering pyramid of authority he had built his entire identity around had just violently inverted. The lowest person on his totem pole had turned out to be exponentially higher than he could have ever imagined. Giselle walked past him without a glance, but she stopped at the damaged emergency room doors, turning back to address the room one final time. Her voice was crystal clear and strong, carrying to every distant corner. Every one of you has a choice to make tonight. You can continue to be part of the system that actively fails our veterans, or you can fight to fix it. I've left you the evidence. 247 families are counting on what you do next. Do not let them down the way you let me down. The emergency room doors hissed closed behind her with a soft, final sound. Through the streaked windows, they could see her walking through the swirling snow toward the waiting Black Hawks, flanked tightly by the operators in black. Her fitted gray t-shirt and dark pants made her almost invisible against the blizzard-swept night. Just another shadow moving through shadows. Pete finally lowered his salute, his arm trembling visibly from holding the position for so long. He turned slowly toward Dr. Webb, his voice carrying the collective, heavy weight of every veteran who had been dismissed, ignored, and treated as a burdensome liability rather than a national hero. Do you want to know the real difference between you and her, Doc? You wear a white coat because you went to medical school and passed exams. She wore scrubs because it was the perfect, invisible disguise. But when it mattered most, when lives were literally on the line, she didn't hesitate. She didn't worry about protocols or liability or her precious medical license. She just acted. That's what heroes do. They act when everyone else is still talking. The helicopters lifted off in perfect, synchronized ascension. Their powerful rotor wash instantly cleared a perfect circle of asphalt beneath them, swirling the snow violently outward. The cluster of red navigation lights disappeared quickly into the deepening blizzard, heading east toward the Little Creek Naval Amphibious Base, a place where far more secrets were kept than most people knew existed. Chun stood in the middle of the now-quiet emergency room, still gripping Giselle's notebook. He opened it randomly, reading aloud into the silence. June 15, 2023. Corporal Davidson's widow brought in their daughter. Severe asthma attack. Denied treatment because death benefits not yet approved. Had to watch the child struggle for breath for 40 minutes while paperwork was verified. Child survived, but suffered unnecessarily. This is not what their father died for. The room remained silent, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of monitoring machines and the distant, mournful howl of the dying storm. Each person present was processing the overwhelming truth they'd witnessed, trying desperately to reconcile the quiet, submissive nurse they thought they knew with the elite, lethal operative who had just been extracted by America's most secretive military unit. Dr. Webb sank slowly into a plastic chair, his hands shaking uncontrollably. 2 years. 2 whole years she worked under me. 2 years I treated her like she was absolutely nothing. And the whole time she was... His voice trailed off, lost. There were simply no civilian words to describe what she was. No common vocabulary that could capture the intense, paradoxical reality of a ghost protocol combat medic. Bradley was openly crying, mascara running down her cheeks in thin black streams. I reported her 17 times for exceeding her scope. I tried to get her fired. I thought she was trying to show me up, trying to make me look bad. But she was just trying to help people. Harrison took professional control of the situation with clinical efficiency. Everyone in this room is now officially under federal non-disclosure orders. What you have witnessed tonight is compartmentalized, top-tier classified information. You cannot post about it, tweet about it, or even tell your immediate families. Anyone who violates this order will be prosecuted under the Espionage Act. She paused, letting the crushing weight of the law settle on them. But what you can do is honor what Giselle Harper showed us tonight. You can make certain no Gold Star family ever gets turned away from this hospital again. You can treat every veteran who walks through those doors like they might be hiding a Medal of Honor under their shirt. You can be better. The encrypted drive Giselle had given Reaper 6 was already being analyzed by a dedicated forensics team at Fort Meade. The sheer volume of damning data it contained would eventually lead to the largest investigation into Veterans Affairs fraud in American history. 37 individuals would ultimately be arrested, including 2 senior VA administrators and a defense contractor who had been secretly selling veterans' medical information to private insurance companies, using the data to deny coverage to those most likely to need expensive treatment. But that was still far off in the future. In the present moment, the emergency room slowly began to return to its expected normal rhythm. Patients were tended to, paperwork was filed, and the lingering traces of blood were mopped from the floors. But something fundamental had irrevocably changed. The staff moved differently, spoke with altered tones, and looked at each other with fresh, cautious eyes. They had been given a sudden, terrifying glimpse behind the curtain of American national security, and they had seen that heroes truly walked among them, perfectly disguised as ordinary, forgotten people. Pete went back to mopping the hallway, but he was smiling a quiet, private smile. The challenge coin was back in his pocket, but it felt different now. It felt complete, like a long dormant circuit that had finally closed. He'd held on to it for 13 years, waiting for the exact moment he was supposed to understand its meaning. Now he did. Sometimes angels wore scrubs instead of wings. Sometimes warriors carried mops instead of rifles. Sometimes the most powerful, dangerous person in the room was the one everyone deliberately ignored. The storm outside was finally beginning to pass. The wind was dying down from a deep howl to a gentle whisper. Dawn would arrive soon, ushering in a new day at the Norfolk, Virginia Medical Center. A day when the ghost of Giselle Harper would silently haunt every administrative decision, every patient interaction, every moment of contempt or compassion directed toward those seeking care. Her locker still stood slightly ajar, empty now except for a single, carefully placed item she had left behind. A photograph taped to the inside of the metal door. It showed a younger Giselle in operational military gear, standing proudly next to a man in Special Forces green. Sergeant First Class Michael Harper, her husband, the man who had died saving others, whose monumental sacrifice had been buried under mountains of bureaucratic paperwork and administrative neglect. At the bottom of the photo, in Giselle's neat, characteristic handwriting, were words that would quickly become the unofficial, fiercely protective motto of the Norfolk, Virginia staff. For those I could not save, I save others. Admiral Hayes was being prepped for immediate transfer to Walter Reed, where a dedicated team of Navy doctors would complete the advanced medical work Giselle had started. Before they wheeled him out, he called Harrison over. "That woman saved my life tonight," he stated firmly. "But more importantly, she's been saving lives for years while being treated like dirt. You need to make this right. I don't care what it takes or what it costs. Every single family in that notebook gets everything they are owed immediately. And when Giselle comes back, because she will come back, you make sure she's treated like the hero she is." Harrison nodded, meeting his demanding gaze. "Yes, sir. The Harper rule will be implemented immediately. We'll have a team reviewing every single denial from the past decade by end of business tomorrow." The Admiral's eyes were sharp and hard. "Not good enough, Harrison. I want a team on it tonight. Pull people from home if you have to. Every hour those families wait is an hour too long. And Harrison, that notebook of hers, that's evidence of systematic, deliberate fraud. Make absolutely sure it gets to the right people." The FBI, the Inspector General, whoever needs to see it to ensure this crime never happens again. As the Admiral was wheeled away, Chun stood motionless in the empty emergency room, staring at the exact spot where Giselle had performed emergency surgery with nothing but sheer determination and decades of combat training that should have been impossible for an LPN. He pulled out his phone and started making decisive calls. The first was to the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. The second was to every major news outlet in the country, detailing the nature of the fraud. The third was to his wife, telling her he wouldn't be home for days, perhaps weeks. He had 247 families to make whole. The Harper family room would eventually be built exactly where Giselle had stood that night. A dedicated, comfortable space for Gold Star families, waiting for necessary treatment or long overdue benefits. The walls would be covered with framed photographs of the fallen. And in the center, in a climate-controlled case, would sit Giselle's notebook, open permanently to the page where she documented her own family's denial of benefits. Next to it would be the old combat blanket she had kept hidden in her car during the 2 years she worked at the VA, the one that had covered her husband's body when they brought him home. But that future was still to come. For now, there was only the quiet emergency room, the storm quickly fading, and the knowledge that somewhere high above, a Black Hawk helicopter was rapidly carrying a ghost back into the silent world of shadows and secrets, where America's true heroes did their essential work in absolute silence, and never, ever asked for recognition. The Black Hawk cut through the dissipating storm like a knife through silk, its rotors beating a powerful rhythm that Giselle Harper had once known as intimately as her own heartbeat. She sat strapped into the cargo bay, still wearing her blood-stained scrubs, the small bag containing her Ghost Protocol uniform resting on her lap. Around her, the operators of Reaper SIX's team maintained their professional, stony silence. Yet she could feel the current of their focused curiosity. Ghost 7 was a genuine legend, even among the highly classified community, the medic who had saved more Tier 1 operators than anyone else in the program's history. Reaper 6 handed her a ruggedized tablet, its screen showing a live, encrypted feed from the Norfolk, Virginia emergency room. She watched as Chun made his demanding calls, as Harrison decisively took control, and as Pete continued his mopping, tears streaming openly down his face. "They think you're gone forever," Reaper 6 said through the internal comms channel. "They have no idea you'll be back soon enough." Giselle's fingers gently traced the edge of the tablet, her green eyes reflecting the cold blue glow of the screen. 8 years, she finally murmured, her voice steady. 8 years I've been documenting their failures. 247 families destroyed by bureaucracy and naked greed. My husband dies saving a SEAL team, and they lose his paperwork. That wasn't mere incompetence. That was enemy action. The helicopter banked sharply, turning toward the coastal lights of Little Creek Naval Amphibious Base. Through the small window, Giselle could see the sprawling lights of Virginia Beach below, scattered like shattered diamonds. Somewhere down there, her daughter Emma was being brought to safety. 14 years old, the same age Giselle had been when she decided to dedicate her life to medicine, inspired by her grandmother, who had been an army nurse in the Korean War. Vietnam. Reaper 6 pulled up another screen on the tablet, the harsh light reflecting off the rain-streaked window. The image was a complex, tangled chart of shell corporations and untraceable money transfers. "This is why we're activating you," he stated, his voice flat with official gravity. 3 weeks ago, the NSA, the eyes and ears of the nation, intercepted communications between unknown parties discussing something they called Operation Whitewash. They've been systematically and maliciously targeting Gold Star families whose loved ones were involved in certain highly classified operations, ensuring that the grieving survivors never received their rightful benefits. Your husband's final mission was one of them. But here's what we just learned, and it elevates this from fraud to treason. The conspiracy goes deeper than the VA itself. It involves a sophisticated web of defense contractors, ruthless insurance companies, and at least one highly placed member of Congress, all working in concert to bleed these families dry. The helicopter dropped hard, the landing gear thudding onto the oil and rain-slicked tarmac of Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek. The rotors slowed, their wash scattering the sea mist. Through the oppressive darkness, Giselle could see a tightly controlled convoy of 3 black, unmarked SUVs waiting, their powerful engines idling like predatory animals. Exhaust mingled with the thick, rolling fog creeping in from the Atlantic. She stood, her body instantly shifting its balance, automatically adjusting to the helicopter's residual movement with the practiced, unconscious ease of someone who had spent 2 decades flying into hostile landing zones. As she stepped onto the tarmac, the damp air hitting her face, a familiar, formidable figure emerged from the lead SUV. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the legendary former commander of the Ghost Protocol program. Mitchell was the woman who had personally recruited Giselle 15 years earlier, pulling her out of the blood-soaked chaos of a field hospital when Giselle was just another haunted combat medic trying to make professional and moral sense of the atrocities she'd witnessed in Iraq. Mitchell's severe, military haircut had gone completely, starkly gray since they had last stood face to face, but her bearing was still ramrod straight, and her handshake, when it came, was still firm enough to crack structural walnuts. Ghost 7, Mitchell said, using Giselle's long-retired operational name, as if the intervening 8 years of silence had never happened. Good to have you back in the fight. Your daughter is safe. She's being held securely in the command center, and before you ask, yes, she knows everything. We had to tell her the outline of the truth when we extracted her discreetly from school. Mitchell paused, her eyes searching Giselle's. She handled it better than most trained operators would have. The convoy moved through the base perimeter at exactly the mandated speed limit, drawing no official attention despite their obvious, high-level importance. Little Creek, even at 3 o'clock in the morning, was a hive of controlled activity. SEAL teams and Marine raiders were conducting live training operations that would continue relentlessly until dawn. The normalcy of it, the silent, routine efficiency of America's elite warriors preparing for the inevitable next war while the rest of the country slept, made Giselle's chest constrict painfully with memories she had spent 8 desperate years trying to bury. They entered a nondescript, bunker-like building marked only with a single bureaucratic number, Building 37. Inside, past multiple intimidating security checkpoints, retina scanners, and biometric screening portals, was the classified command center for operations that officially didn't exist, run by people who weren't listed on any roster, achieving objectives that would never be acknowledged on the public record. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with glowing screens displaying real-time satellite feeds, drone footage over multiple continents, and kinetic intelligence from around the globe. Emma was sitting patiently at a large mahogany conference table, still wearing her slightly rumpled pajamas under a heavy navy windbreaker that someone had thoughtfully given her for warmth. When she saw her mother, she did not run to her like a terrified child seeking comfort. She stood instantly, composed, maintaining a remarkable, mature composure, and waited. It was the same taut, emotional control Giselle had instilled in her. The same iron discipline that had kept them both alive and hidden for 8 years. "Mom," Emma said, her voice steady despite the raw, unshed tears glistening in her eyes. "They told me about Dad, the real story. Why didn't you ever tell me he died saving people? Why did you let me think it was just another random casualty?" Giselle pulled her daughter into a fierce, protective embrace, feeling keenly how much taller and stronger she had grown in the past year. "Because knowing the truth would have instantly made you a target," Giselle whispered into her hair. "Because the people who killed him would have come for you the moment they realized you were the key to his legacy. Because sometimes, the greatest act of love a parent can offer is letting someone believe a comfortable lie instead of carrying the burden of a dangerous truth." Colonel Mitchell cleared her throat loudly, a clear signal that the moment of reunion was over and duty was paramount. "We have a critical situation developing," Mitchell stated, pointing to a tablet. "The media has gotten wind of tonight's events at the VA. Someone in the emergency room recorded everything, the fight, the extraction, the medics, despite the explicit NDA warnings. The video is already viral. 3 million views in the past hour, and climbing exponentially. The Pentagon is in total damage control mode, but the cat is already out of the bag. Ghost Protocol is blown wide open. On the main command screen, every major news channel was already running the story. Dramatic, sensational headlines scrolled across the bottom tickers. Secret military unit exposed at VA hospital. Ghost medic reveals Gold Star family scandal. Black helicopters over Norfolk. Conspiracy theorists vindicated. Giselle watched the coverage with a complex mixture of profound satisfaction and professional concern. "They can't deny it now," she observed, her voice low. "The president has already authorized Executive Order 973. A full, unrestricted investigation into VA fraud, mandatory congressional hearings, and a special prosecutor with unlimited jurisdiction. But we need someone who uniquely understands both the highly specialized medical and operational sides of this war. Someone who can testify compellingly to Congress while also conducting aggressive field operations. Someone who can be the public face of this entire investigation while simultaneously hunting down the people truly responsible in the shadows. You want me to be both witness and weapon?" Giselle summarized, her statement not a question, but a ready acceptance of the impossible dual role. "Your husband uncovered something significant in Helmand," Mitchell continued, her eyes fixed on Giselle. "We thought whatever data he collected died with him, but we were wrong. He managed to transmit partial data before his position was fatally overrun. That data has been sitting in an NSA database for 8 years, meticulously tagged by analysts as corrupted and unrecoverable. But last week, one of our best cryptographers figured out it wasn't corrupted at all. It was encoded using a unique, complex cipher that Michael created, one that only you, his partner, would know how to decrypt." Giselle's hand went automatically to her wedding ring, a simple gold band she had never removed despite the years of solitude. Michael had been deeply paranoid about operational security, having created their own private communication system based on obscure medical terminology and a key derived from their daughter's birth. He used our anniversary date, combined with Emma's blood type, as the key, she said quietly, the details flooding back. "Type O negative, the universal donor. He always used to say she could save anyone." Mitchell handed her another specialized tablet. The partial transmission was on the screen, looking exactly like random, hastily typed medical notes about trauma treatment, vital signs, symptoms, medication dosages. But Giselle could instantly see the overlaid pattern. The specific, non-clinical way certain words were emphasized, the deliberate ordering of symptoms that didn't match any real-world medical condition. "It's coordinates," she declared after 30 seconds of intense analysis. "And dates." And she paused, her face going suddenly pale with the magnitude of the discovery. "Account numbers." Michael found the money trail. The money being stolen from Gold Star families wasn't just being held. It was being funneled into a massive network. "These are the accounts." The room erupted into controlled chaos as intelligence analysts, energized by the lead, began furiously tracking the account numbers, following the stolen money through dense networks of shell companies and offshore havens. Within minutes, they had generated a sprawling web of connections spanning 12 countries and involving over $200 million in stolen veterans' benefits. Mitchell's secure phone rang. She listened intently for 30 seconds, then handed the phone to Giselle. "It's the President of the United States." The conversation was brief but historic. "Giselle Harper, by the authority vested in me as Commander-in-Chief, I'm offering you a direct commission as Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Army Reserve with immediate activation to special duty. Your singular mission is to expose and utterly eliminate the network that has been preying upon our Gold Star families. You have the full, unlimited resources of the Department of Defense at your disposal. Will you accept?" Giselle looked across the table at Emma, who nodded once, without even a flicker of hesitation. Her daughter understood duty. She understood that some fights couldn't be avoided. They could only be won or lost. "Yes, Mr. President. On one condition. My daughter stays with me. Where I go, she goes. She's already a high-value target now. The safest place for her is constantly by my side." There was a measurable pause on the line, then a sound of assent. "Agreed. Welcome back to active duty, Colonel Harper." The next few hours passed in a frantic blur of intense briefings, equipment issue, and operational planning. Giselle was fitted with new, state-of-the-art tactical gear, quickly updated on 8 years of aggressive technological advancement, and introduced to her new team. A unique mix of veteran Ghost Protocol medics, hardline Navy SEALs, and specialized intelligence operatives who focused solely on financial crimes. They were calling it Task Force Harper, and their mission was simple in concept, infinitely complex in execution. Follow the money, find the conspirators, and deliver absolute justice. By dawn, they had their first kinetic target, a major defense contractor named Marcus Reed. Reed had been leveraging his high-level access to military personnel records to identify Gold Star families whose beneficiaries could be easily intimidated, confused, or dismissed as bureaucratic errors. He had been running this sophisticated scheme for a decade, accumulating over $50 million by denying rightful benefits and redirecting the funds to personal accounts he controlled in the Caymans. Reed's one fatal mistake was being predictable. Every Thursday morning at 0600 sharp, he went to the same exclusive gym in Arlington, following the exact same rigorous workout routine, and drinking the same ridiculously overpriced protein shake afterward. He thought his money and political connections made him completely untouchable. He was about to learn otherwise. Giselle stood in the temporary briefing room, no longer in sterile hospital scrubs, but in sleek, updated tactical gear that felt both strangely foreign and deeply familiar. The Ghost Protocol uniform had been modified, but it still carried no insignia, no identifying marks, nothing that could trace her back to a known unit. She looked at her team, 8 highly motivated operators who had volunteered for a mission that would pit them against enemies who wore tailored suits instead of uniforms, who killed with meticulously filed paperwork instead of bullets. "Our rules of engagement are simple and non-negotiable," she said, her voice carrying the cold authority that came from years of making life-or-death decisions in seconds. "We operate strictly within the law, but we will utilize every single inch of that law's power. These people have been hiding behind bureaucracy and layers of political protection. They think they're safe because they never personally pulled a trigger." She let the statement hang in the air. "They're wrong. They killed American heroes just as surely as any Taliban fighter ever did, and they are going to answer for it today." The team deployed in 3 unmarked vehicles, moving through the pre-dawn darkness of Arlington with practiced, silent stealth. The gym was a high-end, exclusive facility that catered specifically to wealthy government contractors and influential Pentagon officials, the kind of place where multi-million-dollar deals were casually made in the sauna and classified information was traded over organic green smoothies. Marcus Reed arrived exactly on schedule, pulling up in a flawless, $100,000 Mercedes paid for with money that should have gone to veterans' children. He parked in his reserved spot, grabbed his designer gym bag, and walked toward the entrance with the sublime, unshakable confidence of someone who had never once faced a consequence he couldn't simply buy his way out of. Giselle intercepted him precisely at the glass door. Her sudden, unexpected appearance, so radically out of context in the highly structured environment, actually made Reed smile patronizingly. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone aggressively condescending, the voice of a man addressing someone he instantly considered beneath his notice. "Marcus Reed, you're under arrest for conspiracy to defraud the United States government, theft of veterans' benefits, and repeated violation of the False Claims Act. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Reed actually laughed. A short, dismissive burst of breath. "Do you have any idea who I am? I have lawyers who eat federal prosecutors for breakfast. I play golf with senators. I have dinner at the White House. You can't arrest me. You're nobody. You're just some." His voice trailed off abruptly as he finally noticed the other 8 operators silently surrounding him, their faces obscured by black balaclavas, their weapons visible but resting low. "Actually, Mr. Reed, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Giselle Harper. My husband was Sergeant First Class Michael Harper, killed in action in Helmand Province 8 years ago. You personally denied my family's death benefit 16 times over those 8 years. You made $27,000 from my family alone, and now you're going to pay for every cent." The arrest was clean, professional, and devastatingly public. Every early morning member of Reed's elite gym watched in stunned silence as he was handcuffed and efficiently led away, his sputtering, outraged protests falling on deaf, professional ears. Within hours, the video of his very public arrest had been merged with the grainy footage from the emergency room, creating a powerful, viral narrative that no amount of Pentagon public relations spin could possibly counteract. But Reed was just the first domino. Over the next 72 hours, Task Force Harper executed 37 high-profile arrests across 6 states. They netted defense contractors, corrupt VA administrators, predatory insurance executives, and 2 key congressional staffers who had been facilitating the massive fraud in exchange for millions in campaign contributions. Each arrest was public, deliberate, and surgically designed to send an unmissable message. The shadows where they had hidden for years were gone, completely burned away by the harsh, unrelenting light of exposure. The media coverage was overwhelming. Every news channel led with the story. Every social media platform buzzed with intense outrage and immense public support. The hashtag #Ghost7 trended globally, and Giselle's face, now linked to duty and vengeance, became the defining symbol of a necessary fight that resonated deeply with millions of military families who had been told their sacrifices weren't properly documented, that their benefits were pending review, or that their loved ones' deaths didn't technically qualify for full compensation. 3 days after the Norfolk incident, Giselle stood before a joint session of Congress, wearing her army dress uniform for the first time in 8 years. The gleaming medals arrayed on her chest told a story of service that most people in the room couldn't begin to imagine. The Bronze Star with V device, the Purple Heart, the Meritorious Service Medal, and others that were so deeply classified they were represented only by a single, dark ribbon that insiders knew signified more than all the others combined. Senators and representatives, she began, her voice steady and resonant despite the hundreds of cameras pointed at her. I come before you not as a hero, but as a widow. Not solely as a soldier, but first and foremost as a mother. Not as someone special, but as one of thousands of Gold Star family members who have been systematically and cruelly denied what their loved ones died to secure. She held up her old, worn notebook, the same one she'd carried for 2 years at the Norfolk, Virginia. In these pages are 247 names, 247 families who were told their paperwork was lost. Their benefits were permanently under review, their claims were denied. These are not abstract numbers on a spreadsheet. They are children who couldn't afford college because their parents' GI Bill was mysteriously unavailable. They are spouses who lost their homes waiting for death benefits that never came. They are parents who were told their child's ultimate sacrifice wasn't properly documented by a VA clerk. Third, criminal prosecution for anyone, who knowingly denied legitimate benefits. Fourth, a memorial fund managed exclusively by Gold Star families, not bureaucrats, to provide emergency assistance while claims are processed. And fifth, the Ghost Protocol program needs to be officially acknowledged, funded, and brought into the light. We've been operating in the shadows for too long, saving lives without necessary recognition or resources. The senator nodded gravely. You'll have it, Colonel. I'll introduce the legislation today. The hearing continued for 6 grueling hours, with Giselle providing meticulously detailed testimony about the mechanics of the conspiracy, the psychological methods used to deny benefits, and the heartbreaking human cost of bureaucratic cruelty. She named names, provided irrefutable evidence, and painted a picture of systematic, high-level corruption that shocked even the most cynical observers on the Hill. But even as she testified, Task Force Harper was still operating. Emma, under protective custody but absolutely refusing to be sidelined, had proven to possess her mother's sharp analytical mind and her father's uncanny instinct for subtle patterns. She had been continuously reviewing the deeply encoded data from her father's last transmission and had found a link everyone else had missed. "Mom," she said during a secure break in the testimony, calling from the fortified facility where she was staying. "The dates Dad encoded, they aren't random operational milestones. They're all connected to specific classified operations that were supposedly classified beyond even Ghost Protocol access. Someone was systematically selling information about our most sensitive missions, and Dad figured out precisely who." Giselle stepped into a highly secure room to continue the conversation. The congressional building was equipped with several such rooms, swept daily for bugs and lined with materials that blocked electronic surveillance. Who, Emma? Who was selling out our operations? The name her daughter spoke made Giselle's blood run instantly, violently cold. It was someone at the absolute highest levels of the defense establishment. Someone who had been trusted implicitly with the lives of America's most elite warriors. Someone who had stood at Michael's funeral, who had solemnly handed her the precisely folded American flag, and who had whispered that Michael was a hero whose sacrifice would never, ever be forgotten. Assistant Secretary of Defense Harold Morrison, the man who had overseen special operations funding for the past decade, the man who had access to every mission plan, every operator's file, every secret that moved through the Joint Combatant Command, JCCOC, the man who had been selling that priceless information to the highest bidder, directly causing the deaths of dozens of operators, including Michael Harper. Giselle ended the call and immediately contacted Colonel Mitchell. They had their true target, the head of the snake that had been methodically poisoning the military structure for years. But Morrison wasn't just another greedy contractor or low-level administrator. He was protected by layers of military security, legal immunity, and political connections that made him nearly untouchable. Nearly. That night, as Giselle returned to her isolated hotel room under heavy armed guard, she found a package waiting for her. It had been delivered by a courier who had vanished into the city before security could even question him. Inside was a single, terrifying photograph. Emma at her school, taken with a powerful telephoto lens, with a blood-red crosshair superimposed directly over her head. The message was perfectly clear. Back off the investigation, or lose your daughter. Giselle's response was immediate, visceral, and decisive. She called an emergency press conference for the next morning, standing defiantly on the steps of the Capitol building with the horrific photograph held prominently in her hand. "Someone thinks they can threaten my daughter to stop this investigation," she announced to the world, her voice cutting through the morning stillness. "They are wrong. Emma Harper is the daughter of a warrior who died for the truth. She is the daughter of a Ghost Protocol medic who saved more lives than most people can imagine. And she is now under the absolute protection of the United States military. Anyone who attempts to harm her will discover exactly what happens when you threaten America's children." She looked directly into the cameras, knowing Harold Morrison was watching every syllable. "You want to come after my family? You already killed my husband. You think I have anything left to lose? You're right, I do. And that makes me infinitely more dangerous than you can possibly imagine. Because a mother protecting her child doesn't follow rules of engagement. She follows pure instinct. And my instinct is telling me to end you." The threat had the exact opposite effect Morrison intended. Public outrage reached a new, boiling crescendo. The hashtag #ProtectEmma began trending globally within minutes. Veterans organizations spontaneously mobilized, creating a volunteer security force that surrounded Emma's safe house. Navy SEALs, Marine Raiders, Green Berets, and Air Force PJs, all off-duty, all unpaid, all standing guard because one of their own had been threatened. Morrison had gravely overplayed his hand. Within hours, his full financial records were leaked by a deep-cover whistleblower inside the Pentagon. The records showed extensive payments from foreign governments, large deposits timed perfectly with American military failures, a clear, undeniable trail of treason that no amount of legal maneuvering could obscure. The arrest happened at his sprawling home in McLean, Virginia, at exactly 0430 hours. Task Force Harper breached his multi-layered security, disabled his sophisticated alarm system, and had him in custody before his private security team even realized they were under attack. The image of Morrison being led away in handcuffs, wearing silk pajamas that cost more than most soldiers made in a month, became the defining visual of the entire investigation. But Giselle wasn't satisfied with just the arrest. She wanted complete, systematic victory, total vindication for every family that had suffered. She returned to the Norfolk, Virginia, this time not as a hidden, desperate asset, but as Lieutenant Colonel Harper, architect of the most significant military justice operation in decades. The emergency room staff lined the hallways as she entered, standing in subdued silence. Dr. Webb was there, no longer the strutting, arrogant peacock, but a broken man who had finally learned that authority without compassion was just another form of small-minded tyranny. Nurse Bradley stood with her head down, shamefully unable to meet Giselle's eyes. But Pete, the janitor, stood tall, wearing his immaculate navy dress uniform for the first time in years, his chest bearing the hard-earned medals of his service. "Colonel Harper," Harrison said, stepping forward, his voice sincere, "the Harper family room is ready for dedication. We've implemented every reform you requested. No Gold Star family will ever be turned away again." Giselle walked slowly through the hospital, seeing the profound, tangible changes that had been made in just 1 week. Photos of fallen heroes now lined the formerly sterile walls. A new, state-of-the-art wing dedicated exclusively to combat medicine had been approved and funded. The staff wore small, commemorative pins with the number 247, a constant, somber reminder of the families they had failed, and their binding commitment to never repeat that failure. Fail again. The Harper family room was a testament to intentional peace and devastating memory. It was beautiful in its stark simplicity. Comfortable armchairs upholstered in deep navy, soft, recessed lighting that cast a warm glow, shelves lined not with trophies but with toys ready for children, and a small, functional kitchenette stocked with provisions. Dominating one wall, her original notebook, the journal that documented the 8 years of bureaucratic denial and systemic failure, was sealed and displayed in a climate-controlled glass case. It lay open to the page where she had first recorded her own family's dismissal by the VA. Beside it, Michael's official photograph, sharp in his Special Forces uniform, hung solemnly. And below them, a bronze plaque bore the vow she had lived by. For those I could not save, I save others. Yet, the emotional centerpiece was the blanket, the worn, olive-drab combat blanket that had shrouded Michael's body when they finally brought him home. It was draped carefully over a corner chair, placed intentionally so that any grieving person sitting there could instinctively draw it around themselves, finding a strange, unspoken solace in the coarse fabric that had touched a hero. Chun was there, a man transformed, having taken an indefinite leave of absence from his director position to personally supervise the meticulous compensation process for all 247 failed families. Each family has been contacted, he reported to Giselle, his voice heavy with responsibility. Full benefits, backdated, plus compounded interest, plus a formal, unreserved apology from the Secretary of Veterans Affairs himself. Total compensation paid out so far, $47 million. It won't bring back what they've lost, Lieutenant Colonel, but it is a necessary start. Giselle nodded absently, her attention caught by a young woman seated deep in the corner, clutching an infant. The woman wore a brand-new, glinting gold star pin on her simple dress, and the raw, fresh grief was etched sharply around her eyes. Another widow. Another family failed by the very system sworn to protect them. "Excuse me," Giselle murmured to the gathered officials, her focus already elsewhere. She walked deliberately toward the woman and sat down in the adjacent chair, the one under the combat blanket, not speaking at first, just offering her presence as an anchor in the storm of new loss. The young woman looked up slowly, recognition dawning in her exhausted eyes. "You're her, Ghost 7. The one who exposed everything." Giselle shook her head gently. "I'm just someone who understands the weight. My husband was killed in Helmand 8 years ago. They told me his paperwork was lost. They told me to be patient. They told me everything except the truth. What's your name?" "Amanda. Amanda Torres. My husband was Sergeant First Class Luis Torres, killed in Syria just 3 months ago. They say his death doesn't qualify for full benefits because the operation was classified. They say I can't even know how he died." Giselle pulled out a brand new notebook, stark white, identical to the old one now preserved under glass. She wrote down Amanda's information with a precise hand, then looked the young widow directly in the eye, her gaze hardening with resolve. "That changes today. I'm going to personally ensure you get everything you're owed, every single cent. And you are going to know exactly how your husband died a hero. That's a promise from one widow to another." The dedication ceremony was a monumental event, attended by hundreds. Gold Star families flown in from every corner of the country, grizzled veterans, high-ranking active duty military, cautious politicians, and a swarming media presence. Admiral Hayes, fully recovered but still moving with a careful stiffness, delivered the keynote speech. 8 years ago, Sergeant First Class Michael Harper saved my life and the lives of my entire team, Hayes declared, his voice booming over the assembled crowd. He didn't hesitate. He didn't calculate the staggering odds. He didn't worry about his own survival. He simply saw Americans in danger and he acted. That is the definition of a hero. He then turned his focus to the woman standing beside him. His widow, Lieutenant Colonel Giselle Harper, has demonstrated that same profound courage, that same devastating selflessness, the same iron determination to protect others regardless of the personal cost. She hid among us, not out of cowardice, but as a strategic operative, meticulously gathering evidence, building a meticulous case, waiting for the one perfect moment to strike. That moment came in this very emergency room when she saved my life while simultaneously exposing a conspiracy that reached the absolute highest levels of our government and defense establishment. Hayes paused, adjusting his stance, looking directly into the primary camera lens. Some people wear their heroism on their sleeves for the world to see. Others hide it under scrubs and mop buckets and years of quiet, unrecognized service. The lesson of Ghost 7 is that heroes walk among us every single day, disguised as ordinary people, simply waiting for the moment when ordinary isn't enough. When that moment comes, they rise, they act, they save. And they remind us all that American heroism isn't fundamentally about recognition or reward. It is about service, sacrifice, and the sacred, unbreakable duty we owe to those who give everything for our continued freedom. Emma joined her mother on the podium, composed in a simple black dress, her father's dull, worn dog tags resting against her chest. She was no longer the frightened, shell-shocked 14-year-old who'd been pulled out of school a week prior. She was the daughter of warriors, the inheritor of a legacy of dangerous service, and she spoke with a measured confidence that made her mother's heart swell with pride. My father died when I was 6 years old. For 8 years, I truly believed he was just another anonymous casualty of a distant war. Last week, I learned the crushing truth. He died saving others, and the people he saved went on to save even more others, creating a chain of survival that continues to this day. But I also learned that his ultimate sacrifice was dishonored and exploited by powerful people who saw his death as nothing more than an opportunity for massive, corrupt profit. My mother could have remained hidden. She could have kept us safe in total obscurity. Instead, she chose to fight, not with weapons but with the truth. Not for glory but for fundamental justice. She taught me that sometimes the greatest, most difficult courage is found in the waiting, and the greatest victory is achieved only in the revealing. The crowd erupted into sustained, thunderous applause, but Giselle raised a hand, demanding silence. And we are going to do it openly, proudly, and publicly, as part of America's renewed, solemn commitment to never leave anyone behind. The announcement sent tangible shock waves rolling through the entire defense establishment. The Ghost Protocol, long dismissed by cynical insiders as mere conspiracy theory or urban legend, was now irrefutably official. Within hours, hundreds of veterans, disillusioned, elite, and highly trained, were volunteering to join, eager to become part of something larger than their individual trauma, determined to carry on the complex legacy that Giselle had fought so brutally to protect for so long. But even in this profound, public victory, heavy shadows persisted. Morrison's panicked arrest and interrogation had revealed a deep, malignant network of corruption that extended far beyond the Veterans Affairs Department and the defense contractors, reaching deep into the very heart of America's national security apparatus. There were other ghosts still operating out there, other classified operations that had been intentionally compromised, other innocent families that had been systematically targeted and destroyed. That night, as Giselle and Emma returned to the high-security hotel suite that served as their temporary operational center, another package was waiting. This one contained a single, small USB drive and a typewritten and signed note. Asterisk, your husband found more than just bank accounts. The truth about Hellman is here, but some secrets kill anyone who learns them. Choose carefully. Giselle immediately plugged the drive into a secure, air-gapped laptop. The files it contained were instantly explosive. Evidence of sophisticated American weapons systems being knowingly sold to enemy forces, of critical life-or-death operations being deliberately compromised to justify obscenely larger military budgets, and of a shadow organization operating entirely within the government that profited immensely from perpetual engineered war. And at the absolute center of it all, a single name and mission code that made her stomach violently churn. Operation Crimson Eagle, the specific mission where Michael had died. The official report had claimed Michael's position had been overrun by Taliban fighters who got lucky, who happened to be in the right place at the right time. The truth, contained in the intercepts, was brutally different. The conspirators had known exactly where the team would be, exactly when they would be most vulnerable, and precisely how to maximize the casualties while ensuring the incident looked like a random, tragic attack. Michael hadn't simply died in combat. He had been intentionally murdered by his own government. Emma read the horrifying details over her mother's shoulder, her young face hardening with each revelation, the innocence draining away. They killed Dad on purpose, Mom. They killed him because he found out what they were doing. Giselle nodded slowly, her mind already racing through the complex implications. Morrison was merely middle management, a useful scapegoat. There were others far higher up, far more protected, infinitely more dangerous. The investigation that had started simply with 247 denied benefit claims had uncovered a vast conspiracy that threatened the entire power structure of the military-industrial complex. Her phone immediately rang. It was Colonel Mitchell. Her voice was taut and strained with anxiety. Giselle, you need to disappear right now. Morrison talked. He gave up names and specific information to get a deal. They're coming for you and Emma, not to arrest you, but to silence you permanently. Giselle was already moving, grabbing their pre-packed go bags, their secured weapons, and the encrypted documents they would need to survive on the run. She had lived in the shadows for 8 years. She could certainly do it again if necessary, but this time would be fundamentally different. This time she wasn't hiding from ghosts. She was hunting the real ones. They were in the lower level of the hotel parking garage when the first team arrived. 3 black SUVs, government plates but completely scrubbed of any agency markings. Men in expensive suits with military bearing and cold, dead eyes emerged. They moved with the silent, practiced confidence of people who had done this specific job before, who made problems disappear, who expertly rewrote history to suit their needs. But they had never, in their entire careers, hunted a ghost of Giselle's caliber. Giselle and Emma moved through the garage like smoke, utilizing the deep shadows and carefully mapping blind spots. The hard, often paranoid lessons of 8 years of preparation were paying off in high-stakes seconds. They reached their vehicle, a nondescript sedan that looked utterly normal but was modified with internal armor plating and an engine that could outrun anything currently on the road. As they peeled away, Giselle made a definitive decision that would change the landscape of the entire war. She dialed a number she had memorized but had sworn never to use. A number that connected to people who existed far outside the normal chain of command. People who answered to no one but their own conscience and the shared oath. This is Ghost 7. Authentication code, Phoenix Rising. I'm activating the network. All ghosts, all protocols. We have a broken arrow situation. The enemy is inside the wire. Across the nation, phones buzzed silently with the same chilling message. Former Ghost protocol operators, elite medics who had been officially declared killed in action, intelligence operatives who had been thoroughly erased from existence. All received the call they had hoped would never come. The network that had been covertly built over 20 years, dormant and waiting for the worst-case scenario, suddenly sprang to life. Within hours, a shadow army had mobilized. Not to overthrow the government, but to save it from the spreading internal cancer that was rapidly eating it from within. They had no official authority, no legal standing, and no protection except for their peerless skills and their deep commitment to each other. They were ghosts, and ghosts could go places and do things that official forces could never attempt. The war for America's soul had begun. It was fought not on foreign, sandy battlefields, but in corporate boardrooms and back alleys, in secure server farms and anonymous safe houses. On one side stood the deep, cynical corruption that had killed Michael Harper and countless others, that had stolen from Gold Star families while wrapping itself in the flag. On the other stood the ghosts, those who had already given everything for their country and weren't about to let it be sold to the highest bidder. Giselle and Emma immediately went underground, but they did not go into hiding. But the ghosts kept fighting. They leaked classified documents that proved impossible to suppress. They recorded conversations that couldn't be denied. They provided evidence that even the most deeply corrupt, bought-off judges couldn't ignore. They expertly turned the enemy's tactics against them, using surveillance, counter-intimidation, and grinding bureaucratic warfare to dismantle the network piece by careful piece. 6 months after the Norfolk incident, Giselle stood at Arlington National Cemetery at Michael's grave, the grass now verdant and perfectly manicured. Emma stood silently beside her, no longer a child but a young woman who had seen too much, learned too much, and grown up far too fast. They were not alone. Hundreds of people stood with them. Ghost protocol operators, Gold Star families, veterans, active duty military, and civilians whose lives had been profoundly touched by their impossible story. Admiral Hayes spoke at the memorial service. His words carried live on every major network broadcast. Sergeant First Class Michael Harper died 8 years ago, but his mission continues. His widow and daughter have carried on his fight, exposing corruption that reached the highest, most protected levels of our government. 23 officials have been arrested. Over $100 million in stolen benefits have been recovered and returned. The Ghost Protocol program has been officially recognized, legitimized, and fully funded. The Harper Rule, guaranteeing transparency in death benefits, is now law. But most importantly, the promise we make to our warriors, that their families will be cared for if they fall, that promise has been profoundly renewed and strengthened. He paused, looking slowly across the immense, assembled crowd. We gather here not just to honor the memory of the dead, but to commit to the living. Every Gold Star family member present here today has my personal, ironclad promise. You will never be forgotten, never be ignored, never be denied what you have earned through your loved one's ultimate sacrifice. And if anyone dares to try and break that promise again, they will answer to all of us. After the service, as people began to slowly filter away, a single man approached Giselle. He was older, intensely weathered, with the kind of eyes that had seen far too much darkness. He handed her a simple card with nothing but an untraceable phone number printed on it. Your husband's final transmission contained more than just bank accounts and dates, he said quietly, his voice raspy. There's another level to this. Something that goes beyond just America. International corporate military contractors selling weapons and intelligence to all sides, actively creating conflicts simply to drive up their profits. Michael found the incontrovertible proof. It's exactly what got him killed. But the proof is still out there, hidden in a place only he would have thought of concealing it. When you're ready to finish what he started, call that number. The man disappeared seamlessly into the thinning crowd before Giselle could respond. She stared at the card, then looked at Emma, who met her gaze and nodded once. They both understood immediately that the true fight wasn't over. It had, in fact, barely begun. That evening, back in the small, anonymous hotel room that had evolved into their temporary command center, Giselle pulled out a sturdy metal box she had kept sealed for 8 years. Inside were Michael's most personal effects, the few items they had returned to her after his official death. His dog tags, his wedding ring, and a small, leather-bound notebook filled with meticulous medical observations from his deployments. But there was one other item. Something she had never truly understood until now. A thick medical textbook, the one Michael had used when he was cross-training as a combat medic. He'd always carried it, claiming it reminded him of their primary mission, to save lives, not needlessly take them. She opened it, finding the pages he had annotated, the margins filled with his familiar, hurried handwriting. But now, using the cipher that Emma had helped her understand from the USB drive, she could see the real, hidden message woven into the medical notes. Coordinates. Not for Afghanistan but for Virginia. Specifically, a secure storage unit in Norfolk, paid for in advance for 20 years under a carefully chosen alias. Michael had known he might not survive. He had prepared for the absolute possibility that someone else would have to finish his sacred mission. "Mom," Emma whispered, looking over her shoulder at the coordinates. "We have to go. We have to find what Dad left for us." Giselle nodded sharply, already planning their approach. The storage unit would certainly be under surveillance. The enemy would be waiting, expecting them to eventually figure out the location. But the conspirators didn't truly understand ghosts. They didn't understand that sometimes the best way to spring a lethal trap was to deliberately walk straight into it, but with your own, larger trap ready to close behind you. They left that night, driving through the absolute darkness toward Norfolk, toward answers, toward a final, brutal confrontation with the forces that had taken so much from so many. The Ghost War was entering its final, critical phase, and Giselle Harper, widow, mother, warrior, and Ghost 7, was ready to end it. The storage facility was nestled deep in an industrial area of Norfolk, the kind of remote place where difficult questions were never asked and cash was undisputed king. Unit 47 had been paid for until 2033, the rent automatically deducted monthly from a complex offshore trust Michael had set up using his supposed death benefits. The very benefits the VA had claimed were lost. They arrived at 3 o'clock in the morning, the deadest, most silent hour of the night, when even hardened insomniacs had finally found fitful sleep. The facility was dark save for the harsh security lights that created pools of sickly yellow in the immense darkness. Giselle could immediately see the surveillance teams in their idling vehicles, desperately trying to look casual, but failing in the predictable way that all surveillance teams failed when watched by someone who knew exactly what to look for. Emma stayed in the armored car, engine softly running, ready for an immediate, violent extraction if things went sideways. Giselle moved through the deep shadows, using the exact infiltration skills that had kept her alive in places where being American meant certain death, where being female meant something far worse than death, and where the only true safety lay in total invisibility. The lock on the unit had clearly been recently replaced. The scratches on the metal were fresh. Someone powerful had been here. They had tried to gain access, but the unit had remained sealed. Michael had been acutely paranoid about operational security. He had used locks that couldn't be picked, only destroyed, and destroying them would have triggered secondary security measures designed to incinerate whatever was stored inside. Giselle had the final key, not a physical object, but the numeric combination Michael had expertly hidden in his medical notes. Their wedding date, Emma's precise birth weight, the exact time of death for the very first patient he had lost in combat. She entered the numbers, hearing the complex sequence of internal locks disengage with soft clicks, feeling the heavy door finally release. Inside was a small, dusty space, perhaps 10 by 10 feet, completely empty except for a single matte black metal case resting in the center of the concrete floor. It was military-grade, sealed against time and the elements with sophisticated biometric locks that would only open for someone possessing Harper DNA. Giselle placed her hand on the cold scanner, feeling the sharp, momentary prick as it sampled her blood, followed by a warm hum as it verified her identity. The case opened with a soft, mechanical hiss of equalizing pressure. Inside were dozens of encrypted drives, folders of brittle documents, detailed photographs, and one other item. Michael's final, personal letter to her, meticulously sealed in thick plastic, waiting 8 long years to be read. My beloved Giselle. Asterisk if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you found the truth. I am profoundly sorry for the secrets, for the unbearable burden I am leaving you, but someone has to know. Someone has to act. The conspiracy goes far, far deeper than just stolen benefits. They are actively creating wars, manufacturing conflicts, and systematically sacrificing American lives for corporate profit. The evidence is all here, everything you need to utterly destroy them. But be careful. Trust no one in the official channels. The corruption reaches places we never imagined. Use the Ghost Network. They are the only ones who cannot be bought or intimidated into silence. And please remember, I love you and Emma more than life itself. Everything I did for you, for her, for the countless families who deserve far better than this betrayal. Finish this for all of us. Asterisk forever yours, Michael. The drives contain terabytes of devastating data. Complete financial records, communication intercepts from secure servers, raw video surveillance feeds, and meticulously documented proof of treason at the absolute highest levels. Names, dates, operations, all cataloged by a man who knew he was living on borrowed time. It was enough evidence to bring down half the defense establishment, enough to expose a conspiracy that had cost thousands of American lives and billions of taxpayer dollars. But as Giselle loaded the evidence into her secure, portable containers, she heard Emma's voice, sharp and professional, through her earpiece. Mom, we have company. 3 heavily armored vehicles incoming, not surveillance. Assault teams. They had known she would eventually come. They had been waiting patient for this precise moment. But they had made one crucial, fatal mistake. They thought they were hunting a broken widow weakened by grief. They didn't understand they were facing a ghost who had spent 8 years planning for this exact scenario. Giselle immediately activated the dead man's switch she had prepared, broadcasting the entire contents of the evidence drives to secure servers around the world, to trusted foreign journalists, to specific congressional members she had vetted, and directly to the core Ghost Network assets. In 60 seconds, the information would be everywhere, instantly impossible to suppress or contain. The assault teams breached the facility's perimeter with chilling military precision, moving rapidly toward Unit 47. But Giselle was already gone, moving through an exit she had prepared years ago when she'd first started planning for the remote possibility that Michael's secrets would surface. She reached the waiting car just as the first flashbang detonated with a blinding concussion inside the storage facility. Emma drove with the cool, expert skill of someone who had been trained by the very best, weaving through the industrial area's maze of dark streets. While Giselle coordinated the information leak with the Ghost Network through encrypted communications, the assault teams attempted pursuit but found their vehicles suddenly disabled by electromagnetic pulses triggered by devices the Ghost Network had planted weeks ago, anticipating this moment. By dawn, the story was breaking on every major news network. The devastating evidence from Michael's storage unit, combined with everything Giselle had painstakingly gathered over the years, painted a picture of corruption so vast that even hardened journalists were shocked. Defense contractors had been meticulously creating conflicts, not merely exploiting existing ones, but actively manufacturing instability, to sell advanced weapons to both sides, ensuring maximum carnage and profit. American soldiers had been deliberately put in harm's way, their lives calculated risks, solely to justify exponentially ballooning military budget increases. Worse still, Gold Star families, already reeling from unimaginable loss, had been systematically targeted and intimidated to prevent them from asking inconvenient questions about the circumstances of their loved ones' deaths. The nation held its breath as the president addressed the nation that morning, his face etched with grim, profound shame. What has been uncovered represents the greatest, most cynical betrayal of our military families, our veterans, and the fundamental trust of the American people in the history of this nation, he stated, his voice tight with controlled fury. Effective immediately, I am ordering a complete and uncompromising investigation, led by a special counsel vested with absolute, unlimited authority. We will spare no expense and tolerate no interference. Those responsible, no matter how high their office or how deep their pockets, will face the full, unsparing weight of justice. And to Lieutenant Colonel Giselle Harper and all the courageous operators of the Ghost Protocol who risked their lives, careers, and everything they held dear to expose this systemic corruption, you have earned the lasting gratitude of a nation and the promise that your immense sacrifice will not, under any circumstances, have been in vain. This time, they were not targeting the low-level functionaries and expendable bureaucrats who had been caught in the first wave. The focus was on the true architects of the deception. The real power brokers, the smooth, untouchable CEOs of multinational defense contractors, senior Pentagon officials whose retirement portfolios depended on perpetual war, and long-serving members of Congress who'd been on the take for decades, voting on legislation that guaranteed their own enrichment. The visceral images of these elite figures, once symbols of American power, being led away in handcuffs, their carefully constructed empires crumbling, their lifelong secrets laid bare to the world, became the defining, indelible moment of what historians would later universally call the Great Cleansing. Giselle testified before Congress again, this time not as a suspect or a reluctant witness, but as a catalyst for change. Michael's meticulously organized, irrefutable evidence, years of covert recordings, financial ledgers, and encrypted communications, was displayed on massive screens behind her. She spoke for 6 unrelenting hours, detailing every horrifying aspect of the conspiracy, naming every high-ranking name, and providing conclusive proof for every single accusation of treason, fraud, and murder. When she finished, the vast congressional chamber was silent for a full, stunned minute, a moment of collective national reckoning, before erupting in a thunderous standing ovation that continued until the chairman had to frantically call for order. But the overwhelming victory came, inevitably with a painful price. The entire Ghost Protocol network, exposed by the very necessity of presenting the evidence, could no longer safely operate in the shadows. Many key operators had to be immediately relocated, given completely new identities, their old lives painstakingly erased for their safety and the protection of their families. The program itself was reluctantly restructured, officially brought into the military bureaucracy and given legitimate oversight. It gained crucial legitimacy, but in the process, it inevitably lost some of its raw, essential effectiveness. A year later, Giselle stood in the same sterile emergency room where it had all begun, the Norfolk VA Medical Center. The facility had been dramatically transformed, renovated from the ground up, becoming a national model for compassionate, efficient veteran care. The infamous Harper family room had expanded into an entire specialized wing, providing not just comfort, but active, hands-on support for Gold Star families navigating the often labyrinthine benefit system. Dr. Webb, unable to live with the devastating shame of how he'd treated a woman who had been fighting for justice while he'd been aggressively protecting his small, irrelevant kingdom of institutional authority, had resigned and disappeared from public life. Nurse Bradley had quit nursing entirely, last heard working at a retail store where she had no power or authority over anyone. A quiet fall from grace. But Pete was still there, vibrant and essential, now the dedicated head of a sprawling veteran volunteer program that provided immediate help to families in crisis. "You did it," Pete said, standing beside her as they watched a newly arrived Gold Star family receive immediate, high-priority care. No questions asked, no bureaucratic hurdles in sight. No paperwork was required beyond simple proof of their loved one's service. "You burned the rotten system all down, Giselle, and you built something profoundly better from the ashes." Giselle shook her head gently. "Michael did it," she countered, the memory of him always close. "He gathered the proof. He paid the ultimate price. I merely finished what he started." Emma, now 17 and displaying her mother's focused intensity, joined them. She had received early admission to West Point and wore her father's dog tags beneath her blouse and her mother's fierce determination in her posture, ready to carry on the family tradition of relentless service. "The Ghost Protocol Training Center wants me as an instructor this summer," she announced proudly. "They think I can help develop new, virtually unbreakable encryption methods for field operations." Giselle smiled, a wide, genuine smile, the first true moment of peace anyone had witnessed from her in years. "Your father would be so incredibly proud, sweetheart. You're carrying on his crucial work, but completely in your own way." Admiral Hayes arrived for the dedication of the Michael Harper Memorial, a magnificent bronze statue depicting a medic shielding wounded soldiers from harm. The inscription read simply, "For those who save others." Hayes himself had been promoted to full admiral and put in charge of reforming special operations oversight nationwide, ensuring that the systemic failures that had allowed what happened to Michael and so many others could never happen again. The ceremony was attended by thousands. Gold Star families from every state, Ghost Protocol operators who could finally, openly acknowledge their service, and hundreds of veterans who'd been inspired by Giselle's singular courage to speak out about their own past struggles with the VA system. The President spoke, as did the Secretary of Defense, but the most powerful, resonant speech came from Amanda Torres, the Gold Star widow Giselle had met in this very room a year prior. Giselle Harper didn't just expose corruption. Amanda stated, her baby, now a sturdy toddler, playing innocently at her feet. She showed us all that ordinary, heartbroken people can fight extraordinary, institutional evil. She showed us that widows aren't victims to be pitied, but warriors to be respected. She showed us that love doesn't end with death, that justice delayed isn't justice denied, and that sometimes the greatest, most enduring victory comes from simply refusing to give up, no matter the cost. As the ceremony ended and the vast crowd dispersed, Giselle noticed a familiar, shadowy figure. It was the man who had given her the cryptic card at Arlington, the one who'd first hinted at the international terrifying level of the conspiracy. He approached, this time not alone, but with a small, discreet group whose bearing suggested they were a fusion of high-level intelligence community assets and special operations veterans. "Colonel Harper," he said formally, his gaze intensely focused, I represent a coalition of intelligence services from Allied vast that even hardened journalists were shocked. Defense contractors had been cynically creating conflicts, not just supporting existing ones, to sell ever more sophisticated weapons to both sides, ensuring maximum expenditure and maximum casualties. American soldiers had been deliberately put in harm's way, designated as acceptable collateral damage, simply to justify the next fiscal year's budget increases. Gold Star families, those who had already paid the ultimate price, had been systemically targeted and harassed to prevent them from asking inconvenient questions about the circumstances of their loved ones' deaths. It was a cold, calculated betrayal of the very foundation of military service. The president addressed the nation that morning from the Oval Office, his face grim and etched with genuine shock, the early morning light doing nothing to soften his expression. What has been uncovered represents the greatest, most cynical betrayal of our military families, our integrity, and our national honor in American history. It is a cancer on the Republic, he stated, his voice low but powerful. Effective immediately, I am ordering a complete, top-to-bottom investigation by a special counsel with unlimited writ and the full resources of the Department of Justice. Those responsible, regardless of rank, wealth, or political affiliation, will face the full and uncompromising weight of justice. And to Lieutenant Colonel Giselle Harper and all the Ghost Protocol operators who risked everything, their lives, their careers, and their freedom, to expose this deep-seated corruption, you have the profound gratitude of a nation and the promise that your sacrifice, and the sacrifice of those you sought to avenge, will not be in vain. The arrests began within hours, carried out with ruthless efficiency by federal marshals and special agents. This time, the targets were not the low-level functionaries who had been caught in the first initial wave, but the real power brokers, the architects of the betrayal. CEOs of multi-billion-dollar defense contractors were pulled from their marble executive suites. Senior Pentagon officials were stripped of their stars and insignia, and members of Congress, who had been on the take for decades, exchanging patriotism for profit, were marched out of the Capitol building. The devastating images of them being led away in handcuffs, their empires crumbling in real time, their carefully guarded secrets exposed to the light of day, became the defining, indelible moment of what historians would later call the Great Cleansing, a necessary, painful period of national moral reckoning. Giselle testified before Congress again, this time not in a closed hearing but before the full Armed Services Committee. Michael's meticulously gathered evidence displayed on massive screens behind her. She spoke for 6 grueling hours, detailing every aspect of the vast, interlocking conspiracy, naming every name, from lobbyists to generals, and providing irrefutable cryptographic proof for every single accusation. When she finally finished, exhausted but resolute, the grand chamber was silent for a full minute. A deep, crushing silence born of shock and shame, before erupting in a sustained, thunderous wave of applause that continued until the chairman had to repeatedly call for order with his gavel. But the victory, comprehensive as it was, came with a heavy price. The Ghost Protocol network, exposed by necessity to leverage the evidence and ensure accountability, could no longer operate effectively in the shadows. For their own safety, many core operators had to be immediately relocated, given completely new identities, their old lives, their families, their histories, their achievements erased overnight. The clandestine program itself was restructured, brought into the official military structure under strict congressional oversight, losing some of its essential agility and effectiveness in exchange for hard-won legitimacy and formal protection. A year later, Giselle stood, quietly, in the same triage area of the emergency room where it had all tragically begun. The Norfolk VA Medical Center had been entirely transformed, renovated, and reorganized, becoming a national model for compassionate, cutting-edge veteran care nationwide. The small, often ignored Harper family room had expanded into an entire wing, providing not just physical comfort, but active, expert support for Gold Star families navigating the often impossible benefit system. Dr. Webb, the former chief of staff, had resigned abruptly, unable to live with the overwhelming shame of how he treated someone who'd been fighting for justice while he'd been aggressively protecting his small, irrelevant kingdom of bureaucratic authority. Nurse Bradley had quit nursing entirely, last heard working at a retail store, safely removed from any position where she could exert power or inflict unnecessary misery on others. But Pete was still there, now the energetic head of a newly established veteran volunteer program that provided immediate, 24/7 help to families in crisis. "You did it, Giselle," Pete said, standing beside her as they watched a Gold Star family receive immediate, seamless care, with no invasive questions asked. No mountains of paperwork were required beyond proof of their loved one's service. "You burned the whole rotten system down and built something immeasurably better from the ashes." Giselle shook her head, watching the scene unfold. "Michael did it. He gathered the evidence. He paid the ultimate price. I just finished what he started." Emma, now 17 and displaying her father's quiet intensity, joined them, having secured early admission to West Point. She wore her father's dog tags beneath her blouse and her mother's fierce determination openly, ready to carry on the family tradition of service and sacrifice. "The Ghost Protocol Training Center wants me as an instructor this summer," she announced, a hint of excitement in her voice. "They think I can help develop completely new encryption methods for field operations based on Dad's old classified algorithms." Giselle smiled, the first truly genuine, unguarded smile anyone had seen from her in years. "Your father would be so proud. You're carrying on his work in your own brilliant way, protecting the protectors." Admiral Hayes arrived then for the dedication of the Michael Harper Memorial, a powerful, life-size statue depicting a medic shielding 2 wounded soldiers, not a warrior striking a blow. The inscription, chosen by Giselle, simply read, "For those who..." The ceremony was attended by thousands. Gold Star families flown in from across the nation. Ghost Protocol operators who, for the first time, could finally acknowledge their service and stand in the light. And countless veterans who'd been inspired by Giselle's singular courage to speak out publicly about their own experiences with the former, broken VA system. The president spoke, as did the Secretary of Defense, offering powerful political testament. But the most emotionally resonant speech came from Amanda Torres, the Gold Star widow Giselle had first met a year ago in the dilapidated Harper family room. Giselle Harper didn't just expose corruption. Amanda said, her baby, now a sturdy toddler, playing innocently at her feet. She showed all of us that ordinary, decent people can effectively fight extraordinary evil. She showed us that widows aren't victims to be pitied, but warriors to be respected. She showed us that love doesn't end with death, that justice delayed isn't justice denied, and that sometimes the greatest, most enduring victory comes from simply refusing, absolutely refusing, to give up the fight. As the ceremony ended and the vast crowd dispersed, Giselle noticed a familiar, striking figure lingering in the shadows of the newly planted oaks. It was the man who had given her the crucial card at Arlington, the one who'd first told her that the conspiracy operated on an international level. He approached, this time not alone, but flanked by a small, impeccably dressed group of people whose bearing strongly suggested a blend of top-tier intelligence community assets, foreign special operations personnel, or both. "Colonel Harper," he said formally, his expression now serious and expectant. "I represent a coalition of intelligence services and defense ministries from our most trusted allied nations. What you uncovered and exposed does not stop at America's borders. The exact same sophisticated corruption exists worldwide. The same handful of powerful contractors are selling lethal weapons to all sides of every conflict. The same unnecessary, bloody wars are being manufactured solely for profit. We urgently need someone to lead an international, Blacksite effort to expose and eliminate this global network. Someone with the proven, unique ability to operate effectively in the deepest shadows while maintaining absolute, uncompromising integrity. Will you, Colonel, consider taking this fight global?" Giselle looked instinctively at Emma, who nodded once, without even a flicker of hesitation. The Harper family had always served, always sacrificed for something greater than themselves, something bigger than their personal comfort. This new challenge would be no different, just on a grander scale. "I'll need my team," Giselle stated, her eyes locking with the foreign representative. "The Ghost Network goes with me." The man smiled, a faint, appreciative gesture. "We wouldn't have it any other way, Colonel. The corruption you exposed in America is, structurally, just one large, powerful tentacle of a global octopus. Cut one off and 8 others will instantly take its place, unless we destroy the entire poisonous organism at its core. Giselle understood immediately. The long, agonizing fight for justice for Gold Star families had inadvertently revealed something infinitely larger and more terrifying. A cancer that had metastasized throughout the entire global defense and political industry. The Ghost War had been a localized skirmish. What came next would be exponentially harder, far more dangerous, with enemies whose vast resources and political influence dwarfed anything she'd faced in America. But she also understood something else, something fundamentally reassuring. Michael hadn't died pointlessly. His death, intentional or not, had started an unstoppable chain reaction that was still expanding, still revealing uncomfortable truth, still bringing hard justice. Every corrupt official arrested, every stolen dollar recovered, every family made whole and honored. It all traced back, undeniably, to his sacrifice, his refusal to stay silent about the truth he discovered. "When do we start?" she asked, the warrior's light reigniting in her green eyes. The man immediately handed her a slender folder marked with high classification stamps from over a dozen allied countries. Tomorrow, a flight to Brussels, then a deep dive briefing at a location that does not officially exist on any map. The international community has been waiting, patiently, for someone exactly like you. Someone who cannot be bought, cannot be intimidated, and absolutely cannot be silenced. Colonel Harper, the Ghost Protocol is about to go global. That night, Giselle and Emma packed with efficient, practiced ease in their small hotel room, experts now at disappearing after a year of constant movement and necessary anonymity. "Mom," Emma asked softly, watching her mother carefully fold a military sweater. "Do you truly think Dad knew his death would start something this big?" Giselle zipped the bag shut. "Your father understood patterns, consequence, and human nature better than anyone I ever met. He deliberately made himself a catalyst, knowing with absolute certainty that his death would create an unstoppable, purifying reaction. So he won then," Emma concluded. "Even though he died, he ultimately won." Giselle pulled her daughter close, resting her cheek on Emma's hair. "He won when 247 families got justice. He won when the Ghost Protocol was finally recognized and protected. And he'll keep winning as long as we keep fighting his war." Their phones buzzed simultaneously, a unique, encrypted tone. It was the Ghost Protocol operators worldwide, confirming immediate readiness for the international mission ahead. She placed wildflowers on his grave, the same ritual she'd maintained meticulously for 8 long years. "We expose them all, my love," she whispered to the cool stone. "Emma's strong. She'll carry on when we can't. The Ghost Protocol continues, not in shadow anymore, but in light. Rest easy, soldier. We've got the watch." The next morning, they boarded a stealth military transport at Naval Station Norfolk, the same vast base where Blackhawks had once landed in a blizzard to extract her under duress. This time, they weren't running or hiding. They were advancing, taking the fight global. As the heavily armored aircraft lifted off into the bright morning sky, Giselle looked down at Norfolk one last time. Below, the newly renovated VA Medical Center was opening its doors. The Harper family wing was welcoming another Gold Star family with immediate compassion, and Pete was mopping the floors while constantly keeping a watchful eye out for hidden heroes. The emergency room where she'd saved Admiral Hayes was just a tiny, insignificant box from this altitude. But the ripples from that single desperate night had spread worldwide, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that one person refusing to accept inevitable injustice could genuinely transform a nation. "You ready for this, Mom?" Emma squeezed her hand, a shared understanding passing between them. "I've been ready for 8 years, Giselle replied, leaning back into her seat. "The question, my love, is whether the world is ready for us." The aircraft banked sharply east toward Europe, toward enemies who didn't yet know that, in the grand scheme, they had already lost. Behind them, the sun painted Virginia's sky gold and crimson, a powerful symbol of a new, honorable day for military families worldwide. The simple, compassionate Harper rule, immediate care, no questions asked, had become international medical law. The Ghost Protocol Training Center had immediate applications from 30 allied countries. Defense contractor corruption investigations spanned 6 continents. More importantly, the culture itself had irrevocably changed. Automatic, blind deference to authority had been replaced by a healthy, vital skepticism. The old assumption that gold star families were somehow gaming the system had been replaced by an assumption of absolute honor and sacrifice. Veterans were now universally recognized as essential assets, not burdens to be managed. Giselle opened Michael's final, tattered letter again, finding the postscript written in their private, highly secured military code. Asterisk, if you're reading this heading east, everything worked exactly as planned. Asterisk, asterisk, the conspiracy was always international. You were always meant to finish this. I didn't die for nothing, Ghost 7. I died to light a fuse that would burn down their house of cards. Give them hell, Ghost 7. Make them remember why they should fear a warrior's widow's righteous anger. She smiled, a fierce, beautiful expression, placing the letter over her heart. Asterisk, message received. My love. Mission accepted. Ghost 7 is going hunting. The aircraft disappeared into a thick layer of clouds, carrying two ghosts toward a grueling, unending war fought in boardrooms and across black sites against those who perpetually profited from warriors' blood. It would be long, difficult, fought without recognition, public acclaim, or medals. But they would win because ghosts never die. They simply wait for justice. And justice always comes, eventually, for those who think themselves utterly untouchable. The Harper legacy would continue, not merely as a poignant memory, but as a powerful, unstoppable movement. Somewhere in Arlington, a warrior rested easy, knowing his sacrifice had, in the end, become salvation for thousands. The localized ghost war was over. The necessary ghost peace had begun. Guarded by those who understood that freedom's price wasn't just eternal vigilance, but relentless action. Not just physical courage, but genuine compassion. Not just battlefield strength, but enduring sacrifice. Asterisk, for those I could not save, I save others. Asterisk, the inscription had become a silent, binding motto, and that movement had become unstoppable. Giselle Harper's story would be told for generations. The unassuming widow who saved a SEAL admiral and exposed a systemic conspiracy that fundamentally shook the foundations of the American military-industrial complex. But more importantly, her story would inspire millions of ordinary people to stand up, to speak out, and to absolutely refuse to accept inevitable injustice. Because if a single widow working as an LPN could bring down a conspiracy reaching the government's highest, most protected levels, what possible excuse did anyone else have for not fighting their own battles against corruption? The answer was simple. None. The ghosts were watching. The ghosts were waiting. The ghosts never forgot. Justice was coming. Wearing the face of a beautiful woman with sharp green eyes and a dusting of freckles, who had spent 8 long years pretending weakness while secretly gathering the strength to destroy an empire of lies. The empire had fallen. From its ashes, something profoundly better had risen. Something ensuring no Gold Star family would ever again be told their sacrifice wasn't properly documented. The mission continued. The watch continued. The ghosts continued. Somewhere between life and death, memory and legend, sacrifice and salvation, Sergeant First Class Michael Harper smiled, knowing his death wasn't the story's end, but the beginning of something infinitely greater. His widow had ensured that. His daughter would continue it. The Ghost Protocol would guarantee heroes never again died in vain. Families were never again abandoned. And those who served in shadow would finally step into the full, cleansing light. The Blacksite team that escorted Giselle away that snowy Norfolk night thought they were extracting an asset. They had, in fact, witnessed the birth of a legend that would inspire, protect, and avenge for generations to come. Ghost 7 had risen, and with her, an army of ghosts ensuring America's warriors and their families would never again be betrayed by those they'd sworn to protect. The war was over, the mission complete, but the eternal watch Michael Harper started, and Giselle Harper continued, would go on forever. For those I could not save, I save others, forever and always until the last ghost came home. The stories end here, but the journey continue. Many new ad show are wait for you. And if you enjoy, please take a moment to like, subscribe to our eStory channel and turn on the bell. See you in the next story.